Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My name's Eli Turner. I'm from a little village up near the Brooks Range. Nothing more than a few cabins huddled by the river where the snow sticks around most of the year and the daylight is just a whisper during winter. I don't get out much, but I know the folks around here, especially the old-timers who've been around since before I was born. They like to share stories over a fire when the wind's howling outside. Wake. And one of their favorites is about something they call the silent visitor. I never paid it much mind at first, just another piece of local color, like the stories about spirits or the moose that wander into town. But that winter, something happened that made me see those tales in a different light. It started in early December when the river froze solid enough for us to walk on. Old man Kata, the eldest in the village, told me about the visitor that comes every year when the nights are long and the cold gets sharp. He said this visitor never speaks, never makes a sound, but always leaves strange carvings on the ice, symbols nobody could make heads or tails of. One morning, I woke up early and headed down to the river, hoping to see these carvings for myself. The village was still wrapped in that thick quiet that only comes with deep winter. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the snow-packed trail. When I got to the riverbank, I saw it. There were the carvings. They looked like a series of interlocking shapes, kind of like runes or some old script, but nothing I recognized. They were cut deep into the thick ice, the edges sharp and clean, as if made with a blade. The patterns ran maybe 20 feet across, and I could see frost creeping into the lines, making them glow faintly in the pale morning light. I crouched down and traced a finger near one of the symbols. The ice was cold as hell, of course, but what threw me was how the shapes seemed off, like they weren't quite stable. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but if you looked away for a second and then back, they'd seem to shift ever so slightly. I blinked a few times, but the shapes just weren't lining up the way they had a moment before. I stood back and stared longer, trying to convince myself I was just tired or my eyes were playing tricks. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed my coat and flashlight and headed back to the river. The moon was low and casting weak light over the snow. The air was sharp, and the whole world felt frozen solid. When I reached the spot, the symbols were still there, but they had changed. Some of the lines were longer, others shorter. The pattern seemed rearranged, like a puzzle with pieces sliding around in the dark. I checked my phone for the time and noticed nearly 2 hours had passed since I first saw them that morning. I tried calling the village, no signal. The cold had knocked out the tower's line, or so I figured. I circled the carvings a few times, careful not to disturb the ice. The feeling I got standing there was strange. Not fear, exactly. More like being watched, but by something waiting quietly, keeping close. I stayed out a little longer, then walked back toward the village. That's when I caught sight of footprints in the snow leading off toward the tree line. They were fresh, maybe just hours old, but they weren't like anything I'd seen before. The prints were wide, with no clear toes or claw marks, just ovals spaced evenly apart. Curious and a little uneasy, I followed them cautiously. They disappeared into the shadow of the spruce and birch, where the snow was untouched beneath the canopy. The next day, I showed the carvings to Keta and a few others. They listened but said nothing new, just nodded slowly like they'd seen it all before. Keta said the visitor never comes closer than the river's edge, always silent, always watching. Over the next week, I kept checking the ice. The symbols kept shifting every time I looked. Sometimes they'd form patterns that looked almost like words, other times like maps or charts. The more I stared, the less I could make sense of them. They seemed to breathe, almost alive. One night, when the northern lights were flickering faintly overhead, I heard something moving near the tree line while I was out walking. It wasn't an animal, no growls or calls, just soft footsteps crunching on dry branches. I turned and shined my flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The light caught on something metallic just beyond the trees, a dull, curved shape half buried in snow. I went over and brushed the snow away, but I couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't look like anything from around here, at least not any tool or gear I recognized. It was smooth, almost polished, but worn and scratched like it had been there a long time. I stuffed it in my pack and headed back, heart pounding. When I got home, I tried cleaning it up more, but it stayed cold and strangely heavy, like it didn't belong. By then, the village started talking more about the silent visitor. Some people said they'd seen flickers of light moving across the river at night, tiny glows that vanished if you blinked. Others heard soft tapping noises on the roof or saw shadows that didn't match any trees. I don't know if it was connected to those carvings or the shape I found. Maybe it was just winter madness setting in with the long nights and endless cold. But the strangest part came a few days later. I woke up and grabbed my jacket, planning to check the ice again. When I got there, the carvings were gone. The river was smooth and perfect, like the cold had erased every trace. I looked around, but there was no sign the visitor had been back. The footprints in the snow were faded, trampled by wind and animals. I walked home slow, feeling like something I'd seen was slipping away with the thaw. I still keep that piece of metal in my cabin. It sits on the windowsill, catching the weak sunlight in the morning. It doesn't rust or change, but sometimes when the light hits it just right, it throws little shadows on the wall, shadows that don't look quite right. I don't know what I saw or what that visitor really is. Nobody does. But some winters, when the nights drag on and the river freezes hard, I swear I can still hear soft scraping sounds on the ice, like a silent hand carving out its stories. I've always liked driving out into the desert alone. There's a quiet out there that city life can't touch, and sometimes you just need that kind of silence. Last September, I took a trip out near the Mojave, just west of Baker, California. I'd been planning it for a while, a few nights camping, a little hiking, some stargazing. Nothing fancy. I wanted to get away from everything for a bit. I arrived late afternoon. The sun was starting to dip, making the sand and rocks glow orange. I found a small pullout off an old dirt road that wasn't really marked, but looked flat enough for a car. I parked there, right where I planned to set up camp for the night, and stretched my legs. The air was dry but warm, the kind of heat that sinks into your skin during the day and cools off fast after sunset. I didn't bother pitching a tent or anything. Just threw a sleeping bag in the back of my old pickup and figured I'd crash there, maybe catch some stars before turning in. After a quick dinner and some water, I leaned back in the driver's seat, opened the windows a crack, and watched the sky fade to dark. It was probably around 11:30 p.m. when I finally fell asleep. I woke up because the whole truck felt off, like it wasn't where I left it. At first, I just lay there, squinting into the dark, trying to figure out what was wrong. Then I opened my eyes fully and realized I wasn't parked against the slope I'd picked. I wasn't even in the same spot. The truck was maybe 30 feet down the road, closer to the edge of the dirt track and facing a slightly different angle. The headlights weren't on, the engine was cold, and I had zero memory of moving it. I sat up fast and grabbed my flashlight from the console. The beam cut through the darkness, and I jumped out of the cab. My boots sank a little into the loose sand as I walked around the truck, checking for tire tracks. Nothing. I looked back the way I'd driven in, scanning the dirt road. No tracks at all. No tire marks, no footprints, no signs of anything that might explain how my truck ended up there. The sand was completely smooth and untouched, like the truck had slid or floated into position. It was impossible. I double-checked the truck's surroundings. No branches caught under the bumper, no signs of a bump or scrape. Everything looked normal, except that the truck wasn't where I'd left it. I remembered exactly where I'd parked because I'd scouted that spot earlier to avoid rocks and dips. This wasn't just a few inches off. It was 30 feet down a dirt track with zero disturbance. I walked back to the original parking spot. My sleeping bag and gear were still there, where I'd tossed them before climbing in. The ground underneath was undisturbed, no sign I'd moved anything. I didn't want to freak out, but this didn't make sense. I didn't remember moving the truck. There was no sign of anyone else around. No footprints, no tire tracks, no campfires, no other cars. I was alone. I got back in the truck and sat there for a while, flashlight off, just listening. The desert was quiet except for the faint whistle of wind against rocks and the occasional coyote howl far in the distance. No voices, no engines, nothing. I tried to piece together what might have happened. Could I have sleepwalked? I'm not someone who sleepwalks. Could someone have moved the truck? But then why no tracks? Why no sign of a person? And if someone was out here, why didn't I hear them? I kept glancing at the shadows beyond the road, feeling like something might be watching from just beyond the light's reach. I decided to check the truck again, more thoroughly this time. The doors were locked as I'd left them. The keys were still in my pocket. Nothing was missing or out of place inside. The radio was off, the seats were the same, the odometer showed the same mileage as when I stopped. I started the engine and backed the truck up a little, turning it around. As I did, the headlights caught a patch of the desert floor nearby. That's when I noticed a faint circular pattern pressed into the sand. It was about 3 feet wide, almost like something had rested there, but there was no scorch mark, no crushed grass or vegetation, just sand compressed and swirled in a weird way. It didn't match any tire or footprint I'd seen before. I pulled out my phone to take pictures. No signal, of course, but the camera worked fine. As I looked back up at the dark sky, I caught a strange shimmer, like a heat ripple, but the air was cool. I don't know how long I sat there, just watching. That ripple didn't move or disappear. It stayed steady for a while, then slowly faded. I kept thinking about the circle in the sand and the truck moving with no tracks. Something wasn't right. I packed up my gear quickly and started driving back toward the highway. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or someone following me, but the road behind was empty. When I finally got back to my apartment that morning, I told a couple friends what happened. They joked about it being some kind of prank or hallucination, but I don't think I imagined it. I'm not that kind of person. I've driven through that stretch of desert dozens of times since then. I've never seen anything like it again. No footprints, no strange lights, no weird air ripples, just normal desert and silence. I still don't understand how my truck moved 30 feet without leaving a trace, or what that circle in the sand was. I haven't told many people because it sounds crazy, but it happened. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I wonder what else might have been out there that night, watching or waiting. It was just after 3 in the morning when it happened. Me and Bobby were working the overnight shift on a repaving crew about 40 miles outside Missoula, out on Highway 200. That stretch between Potomac and Ovando is dead quiet at night. No houses, no gas stations, just pine forest and the occasional truck hauling through. We were on mile marker 84, laying down fresh asphalt in the eastbound lane. Most of the crew had wrapped up by then. Just the two of us left, finishing cleanup and waiting on a tanker to bring more oil. Our supervisor, Ken, had driven off to meet the truck back near Clearwater Junction, said he'd be maybe an hour. So we were out there, standing in the dark with our vests and headlamps on, leaning against the pickup and shooting the breeze. Clear sky, warm for May, probably high 50s, and bone quiet. You could hear the wind brushing through the trees if you stopped talking long enough. Around 3:20, I think, Bobby lit a cigarette and pointed up at the stars. Said something dumb about Orion's belt being crooked, and I looked up just to humor him. I didn't see Orion. I saw something else. There was this patch of sky, almost directly overhead, where the stars just disappeared. Like someone had taken a cookie cutter to the night. It was shaped kind of like a boomerang, but real wide and subtle, no sharp corners. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't already been looking up. It wasn't lit or glowing. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was just there, darker than the sky around it, and moving. It passed over us slower than a plane, but it was huge, massive. You couldn't see edges exactly, just this shape blotting out stars as it moved. No noise, not even a hum. I kept expecting to hear jets or rotors, but there was nothing. Bobby saw it too. He stopped mid-sentence and just stared. Neither of us said anything for maybe 10 seconds. We watched it glide from east to west, right across the highway and over the trees. It didn't cast a shadow, even with our work lights aimed up a bit. The stars reappeared behind it like nothing had been there. Once it was gone, Bobby finally spoke, just said, "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. We stood there for a minute longer, looking where it went, then back at each other. Then I realized the forest had gone completely still. No insects, no birds, nothing. The kind of silence that presses on your ears. Bobby noticed it too. He flicked his cigarette and said we should wait in the truck. So we got in, closed the doors, and sat there with the engine off. A couple minutes later, the sound came back. Crickets, a far-off owl, wind in the branches, like flipping a switch. That's when I started wondering if we'd imagined it. But we hadn't both seen the same shape, same path, same silence, just to make it up. 10 minutes after that, Ken radioed in and said he'd be delayed. Something about a washout past the junction. Told us to sit tight another 45 minutes. We didn't say anything to him. Didn't seem worth it. Bobby stayed quiet the rest of the night. I caught him looking up a few times, real quick, like he didn't want to see it again. Next day, we didn't mention it to the rest of the crew. When Ken asked how the night shift went, Bobby just said, "Uneventful." And that was that. But I've driven that stretch maybe 20 times since, and I don't look up when I'm alone anymore. The phone started ringing around 2 in the morning. I wasn't sure why I even answered it the first time. It was just static, that harsh white noise you hear when there's no signal, but it wasn't quite normal. It wasn't silent or random. It was like a distant hum mixed with a static, something almost alive beneath the crackle. I'm Mike, by the way. I live alone in a small rental on the edge of Bend, Oregon. Nothing fancy, but quiet enough. I work day shifts at a hardware store, so nights are usually for sleeping or catching up on TV. The calls started 1 week ago. Always the same time, around 2, sometimes a little earlier or later. I'd wake up to the phone ringing, stumble over to it, and hear nothing but static. I hung up quick most nights because it freaked me out, but I didn't block the number. It was always the same one. No caller ID, just an untraceable line. The first few nights, I thought it was a prank or some glitch with the phone company, but then something changed. On the third night, just as I was about to hang up, I swear I heard a faint voice buried in the noise. It was hard to make out at first, like whispering underwater. I held the phone closer, heart beating fast. The voice said, "Help me." I froze, thought I imagined it. Called my friend Jason the next day to tell him about it. He laughed, said I was probably half asleep or hearing things, but I wasn't. The next night, the call came again. Same static, same time. This time, the voice was clearer, almost urgent. "Help me," it said again, followed by a string of numbers, 47921. I didn't recognize the sequence. It wasn't a date or a code I knew. I wrote it down. After the call ended, I sat there in the dark, the phone still in my hand, trying to make sense of it. I started checking my apartment, the windows and doors, trying to find any explanation. Nothing was wrong. No signs someone had been there, no interference or weird equipment. I even tested my phone line for problems, but it checked out fine. The calls kept coming every night. The voice repeated, "Help me," and the numbers. Sometimes the order changed slightly, sometimes the numbers were different, but there was always a sequence. One night, I decided to record the call. I set my phone to record while I answered, hoping to catch the voice more clearly. When I played it back in the morning, I could hear something beneath the static, almost like a low humming tone that wasn't there before. I showed the recording to a coworker who's into amateur radio. He said it sounded like some kind of coded signal, maybe a distress call, but couldn't tell from what. The night started getting worse. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, phone ringing in my hand, heart racing. I felt watched. The silence in the room thickened around me, like the air was heavier. One night, around 2:15, the call came, but this time the voice was different. Not a whisper, but a distorted sound that somehow matched my own voice. "Mike, help me." I dropped the phone, startled. The static swirled louder after that, almost like a storm. I sat on the floor, breath short, trying to calm down. I called Jason again, told him everything. "Mike, that's fucked up," he said. "Maybe you should go to a doctor or something. Could be stress." "Maybe." but it didn't feel like stress. A couple nights later, I stayed up waiting for the call. I wanted to catch it live, try to figure out what it was. When the phone rang, I answered immediately. The static filled my ear, but beneath it, I heard a different message. Not words. A voice, but speaking too fast to understand. Then the numbers again. This time, the sequence was long. 47921-538-0647. I grabbed a pen and started writing as fast as I could. When the call ended, I looked at the numbers. They didn't make sense, not as dates or phone numbers. I Googled them in different combinations. Nothing came up. That's when the weirdness spilled into the rest of my life. My apartment lights started flickering at night. Sometimes when I looked out the window, I thought I saw flashes of light in the sky, not like fireworks or planes, more like brief glows low over the trees. One night, I noticed a buzzing sound outside, low and constant. I looked out but saw nothing. The next day, my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, stopped me while I was getting the mail. "You look tired, Mike? Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just some weird phone calls," I said, trying to sound casual. She nodded slowly. "You know, I had something like that happen years ago, always at night. No one believed me either." Her eyes looked distant. I thanked her and went inside. I started feeling like I wasn't alone, like something was in the room with me but just out of sight. I checked my locks constantly, kept my phone close, but I was tired, wired, and confused. One night, around 2 a.m., the phone rang again. I answered, bracing myself. The static was louder than ever, the voice almost screaming beneath it. "Mike, we're still trying to bring you back." Then silence. I dropped the phone. That phrase made no sense, but it hit me in a way nothing else had. I went to the mirror, looked at my own face in the dim bathroom light. Tired eyes, pale skin, hair messy. Was I losing my mind? Had something happened I couldn't remember? I tried calling the phone company, the police, anyone, but no one took me seriously. The nights went on. I kept getting calls. The numbers, the voice, the static. One evening, I noticed something on my arm. Small red marks, almost like scratches, but arranged in a pattern I couldn't place. I showed them to a doctor who said it was probably from scratching in my sleep. Maybe. But I don't remember scratching. One night after another call, I went outside, hoping to see the lights or find some explanation. The air was cold, fog settling low over the street. The sky was clear, stars sharp. I saw a flash, a bright white light moving silently between the trees across the road. I froze. The light stopped and seemed to pulse, like it was watching me. I wanted to run but felt rooted to the spot. After a minute, the light vanished. I went back inside. The next morning, I found a small device on my doorstep. It was round, smooth, no buttons or markings. I don't know where it came from. I threw it in the trash. The calls continued. Every night, the same time. The voice, the numbers, the message. "We're still trying to bring you back." I don't know what that means. I don't know who we are. I don't know what happened to me. But I'm here, and I'm waiting for whatever comes next. I parked at the trailhead around 6:30 that evening. Didn't feel like hiking in the dark, so I figured I'd crash in the car and head out early. It was one of those free backcountry spots. Just a gravel pull-off with a wooden kiosk and a pit toilet a little ways up the hill. No cell service, no other cars. Closest paved road was 10 miles behind me. I'd done that loop a couple times. Flat Creek Trail, northern Arizona, about 26 miles round trip, but never in late fall. The temp had dropped quicker than I expected once the sun went down. By 9, I was already zipped up in my bag in the back of my Subaru, watching my breath fog up the windows. It wasn't a peaceful night. I kept hearing little sounds that didn't add up. Tiny scuffs and crunches outside, not constant, but spaced out just enough to keep me from drifting off. Mice, probably. Or a raccoon. At some point, I fell asleep anyway. I woke up the first time around 1:40 a.m., give or take. It wasn't a noise that woke me. It was this weird pressure in my head. Like when you drive over a mountain pass and your ears don't pop right. That, and I realized I wasn't breathing through my nose. My sinuses felt full. I sat up halfway and tried to clear them, but it didn't help. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not hard, not fast. Just tap, tap, tap. Right above me on the roof of the car, I froze. Thought maybe a branch had fallen on top, except I'd parked in a clearing. Nothing overhead. I waited. 10 seconds later, same 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath and stayed still. A minute passed. Nothing. Then 3 more knocks. Same exact rhythm. I slid my hand down to the zipper on the sleeping bag and started to ease it open. Every few minutes, the sound would come again. Always 3. Always slow. I never heard any shifting, no scuffling on the metal, no leaves falling, just that knock pattern. Again and again, spaced out like clockwork. It went on for hours. I didn't sleep again. Eventually, the light outside started to change. Pale gray-blue creeping around the edges of the windows. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. Quietly unzipped the back hatch and slipped out in my socks, crouched low. I circled the car. Nothing around. No footprints. No drag marks. Ground was soft with that powdery, dry red dust. Perfect for picking up prints. Not a single one except mine. I finally stood up and looked at the roof. The whole middle section was dented inward, like something heavy, really heavy, had stood on it. The center was bowed down maybe 2 inches, and the metal looked bruised. Not scraped or punctured, just warped, like it had been holding weight for a long time. But no claw marks, no bird crap, no dirt, just warped metal and dust undisturbed all around it. I stood there a long time. Eventually, I climbed up on the bumper to get a better look. The dents weren't shaped like feet or anything, just a broad depression about 3 feet across, centered directly over the middle of the car. I pressed my hand to the roof, cold, but normal. No stickiness, no residue. Just wrong. I skipped the hike, drove straight back to Flagstaff. The pressure in my head eased up as soon as I hit pavement. I kept checking the rear view like I expected to see something following me. That night, I parked in my driveway under a bright streetlight and didn't go inside for a while. Just sat there, staring at the warping in the roof, still dented like it hadn't shifted an inch. I live on a quiet street, no big trucks, no low-hanging branches. I couldn't stop thinking about how heavy that thing must have been to do that, and how quiet. I asked a friend who's a mechanic to look at the roof a few days later. Didn't tell him anything. He poked around and said it looked like settling under weight, but he couldn't figure out how. No corrosion, no sharp impact, just a slow, even pressure. He asked if I'd parked under a snowbank or a load of bricks or something. I didn't answer, just said I must have missed something. That was 3 weeks ago. The dent's still there. I don't sleep in the car anymore. My grandfather Walt lived about 15 miles outside Tonopah, Nevada. Dry patch of land off a 2-lane highway, trailer backed up against a few acres of sagebrush and dust. I spent 2 summers out there with him when I was a kid, then again for a couple weeks after college, mostly helping him fix up a busted well pump and paint the deck. He wasn't much for stories, but he had this one thing he told me. Quiet-like, when we were out walking past the old chicken coop one night, he said, "About once a month, maybe more, there's lights that come over the ridge. Not planes. They don't make a sound. They stop and sit there like they're looking." That was it. No big setup, no warning. Just said it like it was something he accepted a long time ago. I laughed a little, thought maybe he meant flares or drones or whatever, but he just shook his head and said, "You'll see if you stay long enough." I was 24 that summer. It was early August, hot enough in the day that you couldn't touch the metal railing on the porch. Nights were nice, though. Real still, real quiet. You could hear coyotes yipping way off near the hills. Maybe the occasional car roaring by on 95. But otherwise, it was just crickets and wind. I stayed up late most nights reading or poking around his tool shed, organizing stuff he'd never use again. I didn't think about what he said until about a week in on a Tuesday night. I'd gone out after dinner to sit in one of those cheap plastic lawn chairs by the fire pit. No fire going, just wanted to cool off. Sky was crystal clear, full spread of stars above me like someone threw salt across black velvet. Then I saw something. At first I thought it was a plane way out past the hills to the northwest, but it didn't blink, didn't move like a plane. It just hovered. A little ball of soft yellow light, maybe the size of a pencil eraser at arm's length. I watched it for a full minute before I called for Walt. He didn't come out, probably asleep already, so I grabbed the binoculars we kept by the back door. Even zoomed in, it didn't look like anything solid. Just a glow, sort of pulsing, but real slow and even. After about 5 minutes, a second one appeared. maybe half a mile to the left of the first. Same brightness, same size. Then a third, lower down. They didn't move, didn't shift positions or get closer, just sat there. I must have watched them for half an hour. They didn't make a sound, not even the static buzz you sometimes get with high-altitude aircraft. Then, just as suddenly as they came, they went out, all three within a second of each other. No dimming, no movement, just gone. The next morning, I told Walt what I'd seen. He nodded like he already knew, said they'd been doing that for years. You watch long enough, he said. They'll start moving. You don't want that. I didn't ask what he meant by that. A few nights later, I think it was Friday, I went out again, this time with a notebook and a cheap little field recorder I'd brought from school. I sat in the same chair by the fire pit and waited. Nothing at first, just stars and desert wind. Around midnight, I saw the lights again. This time, there were 4 of them, spaced wider apart. One a little lower than the rest, almost dipping behind the ridge. They were brighter now. Not blinding, but enough to cast a faint yellow glow on the tops of the hills. I don't know how high they were. Hard to judge distance in a place that flat. I hit record on the mic and whispered the time. 12:07 a.m. For about 10 minutes, the lights just hovered. Same pulsing glow, no sound. Then, slow, smooth, the highest one started moving. Not toward me, not away. Just sideways. Then it stopped. Another one dipped lower, almost behind the hill. I thought it was going to disappear, but it held there, right above the ridgeline. Then they all started to drift, real slow, to the east. Not in a straight line, more like they were circling something I couldn't see. No flashing, no noise. I felt this weird pressure in my chest watching them, like my lungs were heavy. Not fear exactly, more like being underwater. When they finally faded out, it wasn't like before. They didn't blink off. They just got dimmer and dimmer until I couldn't tell if they were gone or if my eyes were playing tricks. I stayed out another half hour listening, didn't hear anything unusual, just wind through the dry grass, maybe an owl. The next day I played back the recording. My voice came through, saying the time, and then 30 minutes of desert noise. No strange sounds, no low hum or static or anything mechanical, just silence. Walt didn't want to talk about it after that. I brought it up again once, and he just said, "Don't look too long. Some things don't like being seen." I let it go. The last night I was there, maybe 2 days before I drove back to Reno, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to this faint flicker coming through the window. Not flashing, not constant. Just a slow pulse, like lightning far away but without the thunder. I got up, went to the front door, and stepped out barefoot onto the porch. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. But the lights were back, closer this time. Maybe 5 of them, hovering low behind the shed out past the chicken wire fence. Not on the property, but close enough that I could see the light glint off the old rusted tools Walt kept piled out back. They didn't move. Didn't flicker this time either. Just hovered there. I watched for maybe 2 minutes before one of them tilted, not sideways, but like it turned to face something. Then the others followed. Not turning in sync, it looked organic, almost like they were reacting to something. Then I heard this. I don't know what to call it. A thump, a deep sound, but not loud. More like something heavy landing far off, except nothing shook. It only happened once. After that, the lights drifted upward, real slow, and one by one, they dimmed into the sky. That was the last time I saw them. Walt passed 2 years later. I went back for the funeral, stayed in a motel in town. His trailer sat empty after that. Someone eventually bought the land, maybe to build a solar array or something. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I look up satellite maps of the area. The hills are still there, the same stretch of road, the same ridgeline where I saw the lights. Nothing shows up in the photos though, just empty desert. It started around 10:30 at night, maybe closer to 11. I was driving back from my uncle's place in Monroe, heading toward my apartment in Athens. Normally, I'd take the main highway, but I'd had a couple beers with him and didn't want to risk any attention from troopers, so I took the back roads. I know the area pretty well. A lot of old farm roads, long stretches between intersections, not many streetlights. The road I was on, County Road 217, winds through some pretty empty country. Old chicken farms, some abandoned houses, maybe a trailer or two tucked back in the trees. No shoulder to speak of and just barely 2 lanes wide. It was cool out, but not cold. Early October. Windows down a bit, radio off. I was just cruising along, kind of zoning out. That's when I noticed headlights behind me. They were far back at first, just a soft glow around the bends. I figured someone else had taken the same shortcut and was catching up. I kept my speed at 45. The road was posted at 40, but nobody drives it that slow. Every now and then, the lights would dip as the car went over a hill or around a curve, then come back again. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then I started noticing how steady they were. No weaving, no bouncing, just locked onto me. Same distance, same brightness. No turn signals, no flickering, just smooth and steady. I tapped my brakes once, just a little, to see if they'd slow down too. They didn't. I kept driving. A few minutes passed. The road was getting narrower, no more houses, just woods on either side. I started getting that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like when you know someone's watching you. So I figured I'd pull off at the next gravel driveway or pasture gate. Let them pass. I saw a turnoff on the right, one of those grass clearings with a rusted cattle gate, and slowed down. I eased onto the shoulder, angled the car like I was pulling in, and waited. I kept one eye on the mirror, but nothing came around the bend. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, headlights pointing into the trees. I thought maybe they'd turned off somewhere without me noticing. But that didn't make sense. There weren't any other roads for miles. I backed out slowly, angled my car to look behind me down the road. It was empty. No headlights, no taillights, no engine sounds. Nothing. I sat there with my foot on the brake, staring at the empty curve behind me. It was too tight for anyone to have turned off without me hearing gravel or seeing dust. I would have noticed. I drove another few miles, slower this time. My eyes kept going to the mirror. The road felt darker, like the trees had closed in somehow. I turned the radio on just to have some sound. Static. Flipped through the presets. Nothing but white noise. That part of Georgia's got spotty reception, but usually I can get at least one country station. Nothing came in. I reached a small intersection, four-way stop with a blinking yellow, and waited a bit longer than I needed to. Just sat there with my blinker on, checking the mirror again. Still nothing. But right as I turned left onto the next stretch, I thought I saw something in the rear view. Not headlights this time. Just a shape, like a pale blur in the road. I slowed down again, checked the mirror. It was gone. Another few minutes passed, then the road started climbing. This section's steep, maybe 100 feet of elevation, then it levels out near an old silo that collapsed a few years back. As I crested the hill, I saw lights behind me again. Same exact spacing, same soft glow, like they'd never left. My heart jumped a little. I wasn't even sure if I'd seen them at first, but there they were. No engine noise, no dust, just those two pale lights hovering in the curve behind me. I kept going. I didn't pull over this time. I wanted to be done. About a mile ahead was a T-junction with a small church, Oakfield Missionary. I figured I'd turn in, get out, see if they kept going. Worst case, maybe it was just some kid messing around. I pulled into the lot and turned off the ignition. My dome light came on. I cracked the door and stood next to the car, listening. Silence. The road behind me was empty again. I walked to the edge of the lot, gravel crunching under my boots, and looked both ways. The trees swayed a little in the breeze. Nothing else moved. I stood there for a while, feeling stupid. Then I heard gravel shifting across the road. Not from behind, from across the intersection, other side of the tree line. Just a single crunch, like a step. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing answered. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and started driving again. This time, I didn't stop. Even when I saw the lights again, 5 minutes later, they didn't get closer. Just stayed back there, always the same distance. The last stretch before town is a long downhill with open fields on both sides. As soon as I came over the ridge and saw the glow of Athens ahead, the lights behind me vanished. Not faded, vanished. 1 second they were there, next they weren't. I pulled into the Waffle House on Epps Bridge, sat in the lot for 20 minutes drinking a Coke. My hands were shaking a little. There was no car behind me, no other headlights on that road the whole time I drove it, just mine. And those. Whatever they were. I've taken that route dozens of times. I still do, now and then. But I haven't seen those lights again. And I don't stop anymore. I was working nights at a gas station just off Route 375, a few miles outside of Rachel, Nevada. Small place, one pump island, a tiny convenience store. We got some tourists during the day, people heading toward the extraterrestrial highway signs, the black mailbox, all that junk, but at night it was just truckers, locals, and the occasional loner on a long drive. My name's Cole. I'm not from Nevada. I moved out here in 2017 after a breakup and ended up staying. The job was easy, paid like crap, but the boss didn't care what I did as long as the register balanced and the place was locked up by midnight. Most nights, I'd clean the coffee pots, restock the drinks, then sit behind the counter watching old horror movies on my phone. We had 3 cameras, one pointed at the door, one at the counter, and one outside above the pumps. They recorded onto a cheap DVR system with a 2-week loop. It was grainy and slow, but it worked. This happened in March of 2022. Thursday night, cold wind, no moon. The kind of night where the windows sweat on the inside. I was about 15 minutes from closing, finishing up the register count, when I heard the chime over the door. It startled me because I hadn't seen headlights pull in. The guy who walked in didn't say anything. He wasn't carrying anything either. No wallet, no keys, no phone. Just walked in slow like he was trying not to wake someone. He stopped right in the middle of the store and looked up at the security camera above the door. He didn't look crazy or strung out. He was in his 40s maybe, short brown hair, tan windbreaker, jeans. Average. Completely average. But there was something off about the way he stood. His hands stayed flat at his sides, and his neck was tilted just a little too far back, like it hurt to hold his head that way, but he was doing it on purpose. I asked if I could help him. No response. He didn't even blink. I waited. Still nothing. He just kept staring up at the camera. I thought maybe he was deaf or confused, so I walked around the counter and tried again, closer this time. I said, "Hey, sir, we're closing soon. Do you need anything?" Still nothing. Not a twitch. He didn't look at me, just the camera. Like I wasn't even there. I stood next to him and looked up at the feed screen behind the counter. That monitor showed all 3 camera views at once, stacked in a grid. The weird part was the indoor cameras were showing static. The pump camera, the one outside, was fine, but the 2 inside feeds, the ones that should have shown me and him standing there, were just snow. I went back behind the counter to check the DVR. It was recording, red light blinking, timestamp moving. No error message. I toggled through the feeds, front door, counter, pumps, and only the pump cam had a picture. The other 2 were frozen or glitching. Every once in a while, a frame would flash up, usually of an empty store, then cut back to static. He stayed like that for 10 minutes, didn't move, didn't speak, just stared up at the dead camera like he was waiting for something to happen. The only sound was the fridge compressors humming in the back. I didn't know what to do. I was getting nervous, but he wasn't being aggressive, just weird. I didn't want to call the cops for someone who hadn't actually done anything. Eventually he turned and walked out. Didn't buy anything. Didn't look at me. Didn't even blink on his way out. Just made a sharp turn and walked out the door like he'd just finished checking something off a list. The bell over the door chimed again, and I looked out the window, but I didn't see any car. Nothing parked at the pumps, nothing pulling onto the highway. I even went outside to check. The wind had died down. It was totally still. No tire tracks in the dirt. No footprints either. Not even his. I locked up early and drove home. Next morning, I told my boss, Javier, about it. He thought I was joking until I showed him the DVR. He watched the whole 10-minute clip with the static. Timestamp ran normal, pump camera looked fine. A couple of semis drove by in the background. One even pulled in and got gas, but inside it was just fuzz. You could kind of hear audio, but it was warped, like underwater. Every once in a while, a crackle would spike and you'd think a voice was about to come through, but it never did. Javier was creeped out, but he mostly just seemed annoyed. He figured the guy was trying to mess with our system somehow, maybe jam the feed. I didn't see how. The cameras weren't wireless. It was all hardwired through the back wall. He formatted the DVR that day and replaced the 2 indoor cameras with some cheap new ones from the supply shelf. We kept the old ones in a drawer, but they never got put back up. A few weeks later, the DVR started recording over that night like nothing happened. I started noticing little things after that. Nothing huge, just weirdness. The back door, which was always stiff, started creaking open on its own, even when I knew I'd locked it. The cooler lights would flicker when nobody was near them. And a couple times the door chime went off with no one there. I'd go check, thinking maybe wind or pressure changes triggered it, but the outside camera wouldn't show anything, just the door swinging slightly. One night in April, I stayed late to stock shelves. Around 1:15 a.m., I was in the back cooler when I heard the chime again. I froze. I didn't want to come out. I just stood there between racks of bottled water and Gatorade, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft buzz of the store lights through the open cooler door. When I finally stepped out, the place was empty. I checked the DVR later. This time, all 3 cameras had recorded fine. But the weird part was, during that exact minute, the feed from the door camera looked off. It wasn't static, it wasn't blurry, but the colors were wrong. Everything had this blue tint, like it was lit with floodlights. And there was a faint distortion in the lower half of the frame, like heat shimmer off pavement. There was no figure, just the door. Opening, then slowly closing. After that, I stopped working nights. I told Javier my schedule had to change or I'd quit. He didn't ask why. I think he'd started feeling it too. He put in some motion lights outside, replaced the chime sensor, even had a tech guy come check for interference in the wiring. They didn't find anything. The guy never came back. Or if he did, the cameras didn't catch it. We were hiking out near the Trinity site. Not the actual blast zone that's fenced and locked, but there's BLM land all around it, mostly flat desert with these dry riverbeds and old crumbling fence posts half buried in sand. You can still find old radiation warning signs rusting in the brush if you look. We weren't trying to do anything spooky or off limits. My girlfriend Eliza had this goal to hike every marked trail in southern New Mexico before the year was out, and this one, a stretch near Mockingbird Gap, was on her list. It's not popular. No shade, no water. The guide site called it featureless, but historically notable. We parked just off the highway around 7:30 a.m., sun already hot even in October. We packed light, water, dried fruit, first aid, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS app running on her phone. She liked to record our hikes. Usually the GPS logs matched up exactly, even if the cell signal was spotty. We started off heading east on a dirt track that cut through an old cattle gate. The trail follows what used to be a supply road during the Manhattan Project, though you wouldn't know it. Just gravel and scrub and endless yucca plants. We passed a dead coyote about an hour in, nothing fresh, just picked clean and sun-dried. I only mention it because Eliza made a joke about it being a bad omen. Should have brought sage, she said. It was flat the whole way. Easy walking. The heat shimmered over the sand like water, and the farther we went, the less there was to see. I remember Eliza checking her phone and saying we'd done 3.8 miles and were making good time. We took a break under what little shade the side of a small, rocky outcrop gave us. It wasn't much. After that, the trail sloped down into an arroyo, dry, cracked earth with a few odd animal tracks, and curved toward a low ridge. That's where things get hard to explain. We were walking side by side, not talking much, just the crunch of our boots and the wind. Then we both stopped at the same time. No sound, no wind, just dead still. That's what hit me first, the silence. You expect quiet in the desert, but this was different, oppressive. Not a single insect, not a single bird. The air felt heavy, like walking into a sealed room. Eliza turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I said, "I don't hear anything." She looked off to the right, toward a dry ridge about 30 yards off trail. I thought I heard something metallic, like a chain dragging. I didn't, but I nodded. We both stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. Then I can't say what changed. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden feeling. But the light shifted, like the sun had moved behind clouds, only there weren't any. Everything felt flat, like contrast had been turned down. We kept walking. I don't remember deciding to. We just started moving again, like nothing happened. The next thing I remember clearly is the wind coming back. Just a little breeze, but enough to make the brush sway. And then the heat hit me all at once, like I'd just stepped back into it. I looked around, confused, because the arroyo looked deeper. The ridge we were approaching was closer than it should have been. Eliza was ahead of me now, maybe 20 feet, squinting at her phone. She stopped and called back. Did we miss a turn? I caught up. She showed me the GPS track. The blue line just skipped. One moment we were half a mile back. The next it resumed a mile farther along. No zigzag, no drift. Just a hard jump, like someone cut a chunk out of the recording. I checked my Garmin. Same thing. There was a gap, exactly 58 minutes missing. No heart rate, no elevation gain, no pace data. 1 second I was walking at 3.2 miles per hour. Next, nothing. Then back to normal like we'd never stopped. We just stood there staring at our screens, trying to make sense of it. The sky was the same, no signs of a storm. We weren't dizzy, no headaches, nothing felt off in our bodies. I said maybe it was a bug, a GPS hiccup, but 2 devices, same stretch, same exact time. Didn't feel right. We turned back. Neither of us said much. The silence had crept back in too. Not total, but wrong somehow. The wind sounded muffled, like it wasn't reaching us. Every step echoed. It's hard to explain. About halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something sticking out of the sand. Looked like a rod at first, metal, maybe 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought maybe it was part of some old equipment or survey gear. We walked up to it, but as we got closer, I saw that it wasn't attached to anything. Just a thin, dull gray cylinder jammed into the earth, no markings. She reached for it, and I don't know why, but I said, "Don't." It wasn't like I thought it would shock her or anything. I just didn't want her touching it. My stomach felt tight, and the air was hot again. Way hotter than it should have been. She stopped. We took a few pictures, but nothing clear. Glare made them useless. We marked the spot on her app, but when we checked later, the pin wasn't there. Just didn't save. When we got back to the car, we both felt wiped. More than we should have been for 8 miles on flat land. I checked the timestamp on the dash cam. We should have been back around noon. It was 1 to 17 p.m. Neither of us remembered stopping. No food break, no shade, just a missing hour. That night, we tried uploading the GPS data to her laptop. The files were intact, but when we zoomed in on the gap, it was just empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and tried to open it in a text editor. The file jumped from 10:43:12 to 11:41. No error, no corruption, like nothing ever happened. We haven't hiked out there since. The weird part is we've never had GPS issues anywhere else, even places more remote. It was just that stretch, just that day. 1 hour we don't remember, 1 mile we didn't walk. I was camping alone out near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, trying to get away from everything for a few days. Just me, a small tent, and a couple of books. It was late September, and the nights were already chilly, but the days were still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset without a jacket. On the second evening, I was sitting by the fire just after twilight, watching the sky darken and the stars start to come out. I'd already eaten and was just about to pack up the fire when I noticed something weird out beyond the ridge a few hundred yards from my camp. There was this light, a soft, glowing orb, maybe the size of a basketball, just hovering a little above the ground. It wasn't blinking or flashing like a plane or helicopter, and it didn't move in a straight line. It sort of drifted slowly, almost floating in no particular direction. The light was a pale blue-white, almost like moonlight, but more intense, and it didn't cast shadows on anything around it. I kept watching, thinking it might be some kind of drone or a lantern someone had let loose, but then it started moving toward the ridge, slowly at first, then faster, like it was gliding. I could see it disappear behind the trees and the ridge. No sound at all. No engines or buzz, just the quiet of the forest around me. After a minute or so, I got up and started walking back to my tent. That's when I noticed a car parked maybe 50 yards away, just sitting on the edge of the clearing where I'd set up camp. It was black, no logos, no decals, just a clean, dark sedan. The headlights were off, but the engine was idling. You could see the exhaust in the cold air, steady and quiet. I froze for a second, staring at the car. I hadn't heard it arrive. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the nearest road was at least a mile away. I thought about calling out, but something made me stay quiet. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, buttoned all the way up, with a white shirt and a thin black tie. His hair was neat, and his face was expressionless. He looked me straight in the eye when he came closer, standing maybe 10 feet away. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said, without any introduction or explanation. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask what he meant, but nothing came out. He nodded once, then walked back to his car, got in, and drove off slowly, the taillights fading into the trees. I stayed there for a long time after he left, watching the place where he disappeared. The forest was still quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I wasn't sure if I should stay or pack up and leave, but I chose to stay the night. Nothing else happened, and in the morning, the clearing looked normal. No footprints besides mine, no sign the car had been there. I packed up and left that day, driving out through the winding mountain roads, thinking about the light, the man, and that strange warning. I don't know what I saw or who that guy was, but something about it all stayed with me on the drive home. I was out on the trail by myself that weekend, hiking in the northern Adirondacks. It was late September and the weather had turned cool but clear, perfect for hiking if you ask me. The leaves were just starting to change and the air had that crisp smell of pine and wet earth. I'd planned a 2-day trip, camping near a little abandoned cabin I'd heard about from some local hikers. It wasn't on any official maps, but I found it marked in an old guidebook I picked up in a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake. I got to the spot mid-afternoon, around 3 p.m., and the cabin was exactly as described, small, weathered, with broken windows and a sagging porch. The place looked like nobody had been there for decades. I set up my tent a little ways off, near a cluster of fir trees, and settled in to explore the area a bit. I was alone and enjoying the silence, except for the usual forest sounds, bird calls, the wind in the branches. That evening, after dinner, and just as the sun was dipping low, I decided to walk back toward the cabin. It was about 7 p.m., twilight, and the sky was fading into deep blue. That's when I saw it, a glowing orb hovering maybe 30 yards from the cabin, just above the ground. It was round, pure white, but not harsh, more like it was softly lit from inside, glowing gently. It didn't flicker or move much, just hung there, floating maybe 2 feet off the ground. I stopped dead in my tracks. My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of lantern or campfire someone had left behind, but there was no smoke, no heat, no sound. The light was too steady and clean. I didn't hear any voices or footsteps around either. The forest was quiet in a way that felt different, like everything had hushed. I stood there watching the orb for maybe 5 minutes. Then it started moving slowly toward the cabin. It glided just above the ground, steady and silent. When it reached the porch, it hovered for a moment near the broken window, and then suddenly it vanished. Just like that. Gone. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the orb, and I swear I could hear a faint humming noise every now and then. Not loud, just this soft, vibrating sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I packed up early the next morning and headed down the trail. About halfway back to my car, which was parked at the trailhead, I saw a man standing near the edge of the forest. He was wearing a black suit, the kind you'd expect for a funeral or a formal business meeting, except was way out in the middle of nowhere. His hair was dark and slicked back, and his expression was flat but focused. I slowed down and he called out, "Hey!" I stopped. "Hi!" He took a few steps closer but kept a distance. "You've been dreaming," he said, almost like a statement, not a question. I blinked. "What?" "The things you saw last night. The light. The cabin." He glanced over his shoulder toward the trees. "That wasn't real. You should leave before nightfall. Don't come back." I looked at him, confused and a little annoyed. "I'm pretty sure what I saw was real. I'm not making it up." He smiled, but it was cold, like it didn't reach his eyes. "Dreams can feel real sometimes, but this is different. You shouldn't be here." I wanted to ask who he was, why he was dressed like that, but something about him made me hold back. His voice was low but steady, and he had this way of making you feel like arguing was pointless. "Look, I'm just hiking," I said. "I'm not hurting anything." "That's not the point." He paused, then added, "Thank you for your discretion." Then he turned and walked back toward the trees, disappearing quickly into the forest shadows. I didn't see him again after that, but the feeling that something was watching me didn't leave for a long time. The next few days, I kept looking over my shoulder whenever I was alone, and sometimes, out in the quiet of the woods, I thought I could see a faint light flickering just beyond the trees. I didn't go back to that part of the trail, and I haven't told many people about it. It's just one of those things that happened and didn't make sense. But it did, somehow, and I guess I'm still trying to figure out what. I was out in the middle of nowhere, south of Gainesville, Texas, mapping sinkholes for the state geology department. It was late September, dry and warm during the day, but the nights got cool. The pasture where I was working was huge, barely a fence line in sight, just miles of grass and scrub dotted with little hollows and depressions. Mostly harmless stuff, but some of these sinkholes could collapse suddenly, so part of my job was to document them and warn landowners. I'd been out there for a few days, driving my pickup along dirt trails and marking GPS points whenever I found something new. One afternoon, I came across a hole that looked a little different. It wasn't very big, maybe 10 feet across, but the grass right around it was thinner, and the edges looked oddly smooth, almost polished. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and I crouched down to inspect it. That's when I noticed the faint humming. It was low and constant, not something you'd expect from a sinkhole. I sat on the ground, quiet, trying to pick it apart from the background noise, bugs, wind through the grass. But it was definitely coming from the hole itself. The hum wasn't loud, more like a vibration you felt through the soles of your boots. I pulled out my phone to record it. The audio was weak, but you could hear a steady drone in the background. I was curious, but figured it might be some natural gas or something like that. I took measurements, snapped some photos, and marked it on my map. I planned to call it in to my supervisor when I got back to town. That night, I camped near the pasture's edge. I had my old tent, a camp stove, and a cooler with some food. The sky was clear, and the stars were sharp. The kind of night that feels quiet but heavy, you know? I sat outside the tent, trying to listen for that hum again. It was subtle, but it was definitely there, deeper and more persistent in the dark. At around midnight, I thought I heard something else, a faint crunch of tires on dirt. I froze and looked out toward the pasture. The moon was just a sliver, but enough to make out shapes. I saw two ATV-sized vehicles creeping through the grass, their headlights off, moving slowly and deliberately toward the sinkhole. I wanted to call out or flash my lantern, but something stopped me. The air felt tense, like I wasn't supposed to be there. The two vehicles stopped a few feet from the hole. Two men stepped out, both wearing black from head to toe. They looked like security guys, or maybe some kind of federal agents, but there was nothing official about their clothes, no badges or insignia, just plain black suits and hats. They moved with purpose, scanning the area around the hole. I ducked behind a tree and watched. They pulled out some small devices. Nothing I recognized, just black boxes with blinking lights and buttons, and started scanning the ground around the depression. After a few minutes, one of them knelt down and put his hand near the edge of the hole. The humming seemed to get stronger for a moment, then it stopped entirely. It was like the hole went dead. The two men stood up, exchanged a few words quietly, and then one of them said something I couldn't quite hear. The other nodded and walked over to me. I stayed hidden at first, but then he called out in a calm voice, "You shouldn't be here." I stepped out slowly, hands raised a little to show I wasn't a threat. He looked at me with eyes that were cold and sharp. "This site isn't for study," he said flatly. I told him I was just doing my job, mapping sinkholes for the state. I explained the humming. He didn't seem interested in my explanation. "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed," he said. I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and said, "Go home. Don't come back." His companion didn't say anything but watched me like a hawk. I packed up my camp that night, feeling weird, like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. On the drive back to Gainesville, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those black ATVs following me. I never called my supervisor about that sinkhole. The next day, I went back out with a coworker, but the hole was gone. The grass looked normal, no dip in the ground, nothing unusual. I checked my phone and the recording of the hum was gone too, like the file had never existed. That was a few months ago. I still don't know what I saw that night or who those men were, but whatever it wasn't just a sinkhole. I was on the night shift in the hangar at Tonopah Test Range, sometime around 97. I'd retired from active duty as an aircraft mechanic a few years earlier, but had signed on as a civilian tech because I couldn't give up being around jets. That night, I was working on routine inspections, checking hydraulic lines, topping off hydraulic fluid, cleaning the access panels, when I heard the runway call. A jet was coming in from a classified flight. That's what they said over the radio anyway. Wind was picking up, desert dust kicking around the edges of the hangar door. I turned off the overhead lights and leaned on my toolbox to watch the landing lights slice across the runway. We never got details on what they flew out there, but every few weeks we'd service a plane that came back from somewhere beyond the public flight plans. When the jet rolled in, the roar of the engines rattled my teeth. I grabbed my flashlight and walked over as the crew chief guided it into position under the floodlights. I'll never get used to how a jet engine sounds when it's shut down, like a giant exhaling all at once. The noise dropped into this low cough, then silence. I crouched next to the open engine bay, ready to check the oil and turbines. That's when I saw it, dark streaks on the inner walls of the compartment. At first, I thought it was just dust mixed with exhaust residue, but the streaks weren't random. They looked like someone had drawn jagged lines with a blowtorch from inside out. I shone my flashlight on the metal skin. The aluminum was bubbled, warped in places, like it had been superheated on the inside. Not just the exhaust cone, this was up by the fan section, near components that never get that hot under normal operation. I ran my gloved finger along one of the lines. The metal peeled away under slight pressure, like burned wood. The crew chief, a guy named Sal, glanced over my shoulder. "You see that?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," I said. "Never seen heat scoring like this before. Must have run hot as hell in there." He shrugged. "That's why it's classified." I wiped sweat off my brow and checked the temperature probe. Ambient in the hangar was only in the mid-60s, but the steel around the engine bay was still warm to the touch. Not enough to burn me, but way hotter than a jet should be after sitting 10 minutes shut down and cooled. I fumbled for the infrared gun and pointed it at one of the warped panels. It jumped to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Sal swore under his breath. "That's impossible," I set the gun down. Either impossible or someone didn't tell us the full story. He shook his head and went to close the access panel, but I held up my hand. Something else felt off. The smell in the hangar had changed. I'd been around jet fuel and hot metal for 20 years. This was different. Acrid, but not fuel. More like burning plastic mixed with ozone. I leaned back and looked up at the tail. Painted number was half masked by black squares. No one knew what the real code was. It looked normal otherwise. A single-seat fighter with swept wings, the same shape we'd serviced a dozen times. But having all that heat inside the bay, nothing in the flight manual covered it. I asked Sal if he'd checked the logs. He shrugged again and headed for the computer terminal. I followed. The flight log said takeoff at 0100, landing at 0245. No problems reported, nothing out of the ordinary. Flight time was listed as 4 hours, but the timestamps between waypoints were blank. "Waypoint data's missing," I said. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "That's to keep it classified. We only get what they feed us." I tapped the screen. "Look at this." Hydraulic temps were normal. Fuel flow was normal. No overtemp alarms. Nothing shows up on the readouts. Sal didn't say anything. He just closed the log. We walked back to the jet. The hangar doors were half closed now, moonlight spilling onto the concrete. The jet gleamed under the yellow lights, but the black streaks in the engine bay looked almost sinister. I felt a knot form in my throat, like I was staring at evidence of something nobody wanted me to see. I opened a side panel to inspect the fuel lines. They were fine. No leaks, no discoloration, just clean metal. That didn't make sense. To heat the engine bay like that, combustion had to be way hotter than kerosene burn. I thought of nuclear exhaust. Totally ridiculous, but I couldn't think of anything else. Sal signaled the tug drivers to wheel the jet out. Before they hooked up, he gave me a look. Forget it, he said. We clean it up, run the standard tests, and send it back out. I hesitated. Clean it up how? It's structural damage. He shrugged. It'll buff out. Routine maintenance for tomorrow. I watched as they rolled the jet away, putting back the panels like nothing had happened. The desert wind rattled the doors, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the shadows. Just a flicker. I turned, flashlight swinging, but there was no one there. I spent the rest of the shift pretending nothing was wrong, changing filters on a transport plane, inspecting the radar dishes. But my mind stayed on that fighter. Heat scoring that couldn't happen, logs that vanished, black streaks inside the engine bay. When my shift ended at 600, Sal was heading home. I caught up to him by the lockers. "Don't say anything," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." He patted me on the shoulder and walked off. I locked up my tools and drove out of the compound as the sun came up, pink light creeping over the desert. Back at my trailer, coffee in hand, I stared at the engine bay in my mind's eye. I thought about the abandoned runway out past the north gate, about the nights I'd stayed late, watching classified jets lift off into the dark. I never got a glimpse of what they were testing, just the taillights fading away. I don't know what burned up that engine bay. I don't know what flew that mission. All I know is the metal showed heat it shouldn't have. The logs were scrubbed, and in a classified operation, the only story that sticks is the one you never tell. I'd pulled off at the overlook on Route 36, just past Lyons, around 8:15 p.m. I remember the time because I'd sent a text to my sister when I got there, a photo of the view, all purple and orange with the last bit of sunset behind the mountains. She replied with a thumbs up. I didn't answer after that. It was mid-June, warm enough that the car windows were down, but not too buggy yet. I'd driven up from Boulder after work to clear my head. No real reason. I'd been doing that a lot lately, just taking random drives after dinner, letting my phone shuffle music, stopping at whatever trailhead or pull-off felt right. This one was empty except for my car. A gravel turnout with a wooden rail and one of those old information boards with faded writing about elk migration. I parked front-facing the valley, engine off. No plans, just sat there, arms crossed on the steering wheel, watching the colors fade out. Maybe 10 minutes passed before I noticed the light. It wasn't bright, just a soft glow off to the left above the tree line. Pale blue, steady. I assumed it was a helicopter at first. There's a medical flight route that passes through sometimes, but it wasn't moving like one. It was just sitting there, totally still. Not wobbling, not blinking, no red or green markers, no noise either. I thought maybe it was farther off than it looked. A drone, maybe. Or a star behind thin clouds. But when I leaned out my window and looked again, it was lower than I thought, and closer. The trees below it were lit faintly, like a dome of soft light was falling over that section of the hillside. Just enough to see the tops swaying a bit in the breeze. Everything else around me was quiet. No cars coming, no wind where I was. I kept watching. Maybe 2-3 minutes went by. I was just about to take a photo when it moved. It didn't tilt or drift, it just pivoted in place, like a cursor on a screen. From facing one direction to another, no in between. Then it rose straight up, fast. I don't mean gradually ascending. I mean up, instantly. Like if you dropped a frame in a video, one moment it was level with the trees, and the next, it was way above them. Still no noise, no wind gusts, no trail behind it. I blinked a few times and leaned all the way out the window. The light was higher now, almost overhead. It hovered again, just a pinprick against the dusk. Then it started moving across the sky, slow and smooth, heading west. But again, not banking, not adjusting, just gliding perfectly horizontal. That's when I noticed my radio had gone dead. I hadn't been paying attention to the music. It was on low, some mellow playlist I'd been letting run. But when I glanced at the display, it was frozen. Screen lit up, but no track info, no sound. I tried turning the volume knob. Nothing. Pressed the power button. Still nothing. Then the screen blinked out completely. The cabin light dimmed. Not off, just drained. That's when the fear kicked in. Not panic, but the kind that creeps up your spine and makes your hands go still. I sat back, rolled up the window, and locked the doors without thinking. My eyes stayed on that light. It was farther now, higher too, but it hadn't flickered or changed shape. just that same pale blue circle like a flashlight pressed against frosted glass. I watched it move until it passed behind a bank of clouds. Then it was gone. The valley was dark again, normal dark. The trees, the overlook, the wooden railing, all still there. But I felt like something had been taken out of the world, like I'd seen behind a curtain and it had dropped shut again. I sat there for a long time after. The radio didn't come back. I started the engine. It turned over fine, but the screen stayed black. My phone had one bar, no data. The drive back to town took 30 minutes. I passed maybe 2 other cars. Didn't see any aircraft, no low-flying helicopters, no towers or searchlights. When I got home, I turned off the engine and the radio came back to life. Song halfway through, volume normal, like nothing had happened. The photo I sent my sister was still in my messages, but when I looked at the next few photos on my camera roll, they were black. 5 or 6 shots I didn't remember taking, all time-stamped around the same time I saw the light. Nothing on them, but static. I didn't tell anyone for a few days. Eventually I brought it up to a coworker, sort of as a joke. They laughed and said, maybe I saw a drone. I nodded and didn't push it. I know what drones look like. This wasn't one. I was working the graveyard shift at the gas station out by Route 57, just outside of Plainfield, Illinois. The kind of place that's mostly empty after midnight, with nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rumble of a semi rolling by. I was used to long, slow nights, just me behind the counter, keeping an eye on the pumps through the big front windows. This started one night around 2 a.m., just after I'd restocked the shelves and grabbed a coffee from the back. I was standing behind the register when I noticed, out in the parking lot under the security light, a pale figure. At first, I thought maybe someone had parked and was just standing there, smoking or waiting on a friend. But there was something odd about it. The figure wasn't moving, just standing still, facing the store like it was watching. I caught my breath for a second because it was way too quiet for anyone to just be standing there like that. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward the door, ready to ask if they needed anything or if they were okay. When I got outside, no one was there. The lot was empty except for a few parked cars that had been there all night. I looked around, called out a quiet, "Hey," but nothing. Just the cold wind rattling the metal sign above. I figured maybe I was tired or had just imagined it. The light was bright and cast weird shadows. It could have been a trick. But the weird thing was, when I checked the security cameras inside, the figure never showed up on any of the feeds. I rewound the footage from that time, watching the lot, the pumps, even the side alley. Nothing. I shrugged it off and went back inside, thinking maybe it was just some glitch or reflection on the glass. The next night, it happened again. Around the same time, the same pale figure standing just under that light. I saw it right from the counter, frozen, facing the building. This time I kept my eyes glued to it for a couple of minutes, trying to convince myself it was a person in a white jacket or something. But it didn't move at all. I told myself to go outside again, but this time I waited. I watched it for maybe 10 minutes. Still no movement, no blinking, no shift in stance. Then, after what felt like forever, it disappeared. Just vanished. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. Just gone. Again, nothing showed up on the cameras. I rewound the footage the next day at work, and it was like the lot was empty the entire time. No figure ever crossed the frame. I started to get a little on edge after that. It wasn't just me seeing it, though. One of the regular truck drivers, a guy named Mike, came in around 3 a.m. a few nights later. I mentioned it casually, half joking, but he looked at me serious. "Man, I know what you're talking about," he said. "I've been pulling through this station for years. Sometimes, when I'm waiting for my break to end, I swear I see a ghost standing out there, just standing, staring, then it's gone." I figured it was a local ghost story or something the drivers had picked up, but it didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made me more nervous. A few nights after that, I stayed outside longer after my shift ended. I didn't want to leave until I was sure I wasn't going to see that thing again. The security light was buzzing faintly overhead, the night air cold and still. Then I caught it again, the pale figure standing under the light. This time I noticed something else. The figure didn't have a face. Not like a mask or something hidden in shadows, but no features at all. Just a smooth, pale blur where a face should be. I rubbed my eyes, stepped closer, and it didn't move or react. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" No answer. No movement. My heart started pounding, and I didn't want to be near it anymore. I went back inside, locked the doors, and triple-checked the cameras. Nothing again. After that night, the figure started appearing at slightly different times, not always exactly 2 a.m., sometimes a bit earlier, sometimes a bit later, but always under that same security light. One night, the power flickered while the figure was there. The light went out for maybe 2 seconds, then came back on. When it did, the figure was gone. I scanned the lot with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints, no car, no sign anyone had been there. The strangest part was that none of the other security cameras, like the ones at the pump islands or on the building sides, ever caught it. Just that one spot under the big light, visible only from inside the store. I started keeping a journal at work, jotting down the times the figure appeared, the weather conditions, what I was doing. Nothing consistent came up. Sometimes it was cold and clear, other times rainy or foggy. One morning, after a long night of watching and no sign of the figure, I stepped out to check the lot. The air smelled different, like ozone or something electric. The ground near the light had a patch where the grass was flattened, but no tire tracks or footprints led there. I felt like I was being watched then, like there was a presence just outside my field of vision. I spun around quickly, but there was no one, just the empty lot and the road stretching into the dark. A week later, I finally told my boss I wanted to change shifts. I needed days off to clear my head. The figure was still showing up every now and then, and it made it hard to focus. She didn't say much, just nodded and told me to take some time. I left the gas station that night, feeling like something was still following me as I drove down the empty highway. I checked the rearview mirror a dozen times, but nothing. Now, when I drive past that gas station on my way home, sometimes I glance up at the security light. Every once in a while, I think I see a flicker in the corner of my eye. But when I look directly, there's nothing. I don't know what that figure was, and maybe I never will. But I know I saw it, night after night, standing there under that light, watching, and whatever it wasn't recorded anywhere. We were about 6 miles into the backcountry, somewhere north of Bozeman. I don't remember the exact trail, something off the Spanish Peaks. It was me and my friend Eli. We'd both done trips like this before, and this one wasn't anything special. Early September, decent weather, just cold enough at night to make coffee in the morning feel earned. We got to our site just before dusk. It was this flat patch of grass beside a small alpine lake, ringed by pines and backed up against a ridge. No one else around. We pitched the tent, made dinner, and settled in. The moon hadn't come up yet, so it got dark fast. That kind of quiet dark you only get when you're far enough from any roads. Around 9, we laid out on our sleeping pads by the water. We hadn't made a fire, too dry up there, so we just laid back and watched the sky. Stars were out in full, the kind of view where you feel like you're floating under them, not looking up at them. I remember pointing out Cassiopeia and Eli asking if I could really see shapes in that mess. It started slow, not even weird at first. I saw this cluster of faint stars that seemed closer together than they should have been, like someone had pressed a thumb into the sky and made a denser patch. At first, I figured it was my eyes adjusting. Then Eli asked, "Are those moving?" We both sat up. There were about 20 of them. Not the brightest stars, just slightly dimmer than the ones around them. But they weren't fixed. They were gliding, barely perceptible at first, but definitely shifting. All of them. Together. We stared in silence. They moved into a kind of grid. 4 rows, maybe 5 columns. Perfect spacing, dead straight lines. The way they arranged themselves didn't feel like movement. It felt like placement, like something being set down carefully. Then they stopped. Just held there. No pulsing, no flicker, no sound. I remember feeling like the lake had gone quiet. Even the breeze in the trees had died. We sat like that for maybe a minute. Could have been longer. It felt weird to breathe. Then just as slowly they started drifting apart again. Not random, but natural, like a breeze pushing leaves across a surface. They returned to where they'd been, more or less, and then blended back into the rest of the stars. No flash, no zooming off into the distance. They just unarranged. Neither of us said anything for a while. I remember hearing Eli swallow hard. Then he laughed a little and said, "What the hell was that?" We didn't have a camera. Even if we had, it wouldn't have caught them. Too faint, too far. But we both saw it, clear as anything. We stayed out a bit longer, trying to watch the same area of the sky, but nothing else moved. Eventually, we got in the tent. Neither of us could sleep for hours. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to piss. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold. The lake had fog on it, thin, low to the ground like steam, but the stars were still out. I didn't look up right away. Just went to the tree line, did my business, then turned to head back. That's when I heard it. A faint whirring, like a drone, but slower. Less of a buzz, more of a low glide. I crouched near the tent and looked up. Nothing there. Not at first. Then I saw a shape move across the stars. No lights, just a black outline sliding across the sky. I only noticed it because it blocked out stars as it went. A triangle, I think. Not sharp-edged, but smooth and wide. It didn't bank or blink or tilt, just moved, slow and even, across the sky until it disappeared behind the ridge. I didn't wake Eli, just crawled back into the tent and laid there with my eyes open. Next morning, we didn't say much during breakfast. Eli finally asked if I'd seen it move again during the night. I said, yeah, something passed overhead. He just nodded. We packed up fast. Something about that place didn't feel right anymore. The silence felt off, not peaceful, just emptied out. We didn't even stop for lunch. Got back to the car by late afternoon, drove straight home. Neither of us really brings it up anymore. Not because we're scared, but because there's nothing to add. We saw it. That grid. The shape in the sky, and then it was gone. I was stationed at a small radar facility outside Minot, North Dakota back in 2006. Not the main Air Force base. This was one of those satellite installations nobody really talks about. Just 3 concrete buildings, a perimeter fence, and a bunch of radio towers pointing every direction. Most nights were dead quiet. Snow half the year, wind the rest. I was 27, ex-Navy, working contract as a comms tech. The kind of job where you sit in a chair for 12 hours and maybe get up twice, just monitoring systems, checking logs, keeping everything running. 4 of us on rotation, 2 inside the ops trailer, 2 in the maintenance building. Nights were usually just me and a guy named Cole Varga. He was older, Army background, I think, quiet type. Never talked about himself unless you asked directly. The first time it happened, I didn't even notice. It was late January, around 2 a.m., and we were midway through a blizzard warning. Visibility was crap. I was logging routine static bursts on one of the long-range bands when Cole came in from his smoke break looking weird. He stood by the door, brushing snow off his jacket, and said, "You feel that?" I said, "Feel what?" He looked out the window, then glanced at the wall clock. "Never mind," he said. "Happens sometimes, usually Wednesdays." I thought he was just messing with me. Guys get bored, say weird stuff. But the next week, same shift, same time, he asked again, "You hear anything?" I said no, just the wind. He shook his head. Shouldn't even be that. He told me without looking up from his screen that every Wednesday at 2:13 a.m., the sky above the site went quiet. That was the word he used. Not dark, not empty, quiet. Like the whole thing, stars, clouds, satellites, got turned off for a few seconds. Said it started after some equipment was swapped out in late 2004. New tower, new dish. No explanation. I asked what he meant by quiet, and he said, "You'll know it when it happens." Third week, I stepped outside to check the tower lights like I was supposed to. It was cold enough to freeze the hair inside your nose, so I didn't linger. But just as I turned back toward the door, I realized the wind had stopped. Like, completely. I looked up, the stars were gone. All of them, no clouds, no haze, just black. It wasn't overcast, it was like someone put a lid over the sky. I held my breath, listening. No hum from the towers, no rustle from the snow-covered grass. Even the power lines weren't buzzing. Just this crushing silence, like being deep underwater. It lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Then everything came back. Wind hit my face, antennas whined. A few stars reappeared. I went back inside. Cole didn't say anything at first. Then he looked up from his coffee and said, "See what I mean?" I didn't know what to say. I told him maybe it was cloud cover. He laughed once and said, "Clouds don't kill EM bleed, not like that." The next few weeks, I started checking the time. I'd go outside around 2:10 every Wednesday just to see, and it happened. Not always the same, but close enough. Once, all the exterior lights dimmed like a brownout, but only for a few seconds. Another time, I saw a shape, long and flat, blocking out the stars directly above the far tower. No sound, no movement, then gone. By March, I started noticing other things. One night, the seismic sensors we had buried behind the generator shed registered 3 massive pressure spikes, like something enormous passed overhead at low altitude. Nothing visual, just that same dead silence and then a return to normal. Cole marked the logs like usual, but didn't flag it. He said, "Command doesn't want it flagged." I asked who told him that, and he just shrugged. People up the chain. April, we had a systems check scheduled during that window. Base wanted a full diagnostic of the dish relays, so we had both of us in the ops trailer watching signal returns. Right on time, 2:13, all outbound frequencies spiked into the red for about 4 seconds. Incoming dropped to 0. Just a flat line across every band. Then the screens blinked twice and reset like nothing happened. Cole leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "That's new," he said. That same night, the backup clocks jumped forward by 3 minutes. Main clock stayed the same. GPS sync showed no error. But I watched the digital readouts change. Not slowly, not a glitch. Just straight from 2:14 to 2:17. We had to recalibrate them manually. Cole logged it, but again, no flags. The weirdest part came in late May. It was still cold, snow melting off in patches, and I'd gotten in the habit of bringing a camera out during those early morning checks. Just a basic DSLR with night mode. That night, I set it on a tripod near the eastern fence. Pointing straight up, I triggered a 10-second exposure at exactly 2:12:50 a.m. After the silence passed, I went back to check the shot. Looked normal at first. Then I zoomed in. There was something faint near the center. Not a dot, not a streak, more like a smudge. Like a shadow burned into the image. Long and wide and slightly curved. No lights, no definition. But it was there. I tried another shot, same angle, nothing. I showed it to Cole the next night. He stared at it for a long time and said, "You keep that off any network, just in case." June was my last month there. I'd already put in my transfer papers. I didn't tell anyone outside the site about what I'd seen. Not because I thought it was classified, but because I didn't know how to explain it. You start trying to describe silence to someone who's never heard real silence, and they just nod along. My last Wednesday shift, I went out early. Sat on the hood of the truck with a thermos and watched the sky. At 2:13, everything stopped again. Not just sound, movement, wind, insects. Even the clouds that had been slowly drifting west just paused. I looked straight up, and I swear for a second I saw it. Not the shape, but the absence. A part of the sky that didn't match the rest. Like a patch of different black, darker somehow. Then it moved, sliding west without making a sound, and the world came back online. I didn't say anything to Cole, just went back inside and finished my shift. A week later, I was in Seattle, working IT at a drone testing facility. Nothing strange ever happened there. I still have the photo. Kept it on a USB drive, never uploaded. The camera's long gone. I don't show it to people, it doesn't prove anything, just a blur against a black sky. But every once in a while, when I wake up around 2 in the morning, I step outside and look up, and I listen. I was driving home late that night, somewhere on Highway 89 between Lake Tahoe and Truckee. It was one of those cold, clear November evenings, the kind where your breath fogs up the windows even if the heater's on full blast. The road was mostly empty, just me and the dark trees lining both sides, shadows stretching out like fingers. I was tired but didn't want to stop. The sooner I got home, the better. Then, just as I was passing the little turnout near Donner Summit, I saw her, a woman standing by the shoulder, thumb out. She looked soaked through, wearing a soaked jacket and shivering. I almost didn't stop. This stretch is known for sketchy stuff, and I usually avoid picking up strangers, but something about her made me slow down. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like she really needed help. I pulled over, cracked the window. "Need a ride?" She nodded quickly, getting in without much fuss. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but steady. Her name was Lisa. She didn't say much at first, just stared out the window while I drove. I glanced over a few times. She had those wide, pale eyes like she hadn't slept in days. There was a faint scent I couldn't place, almost like cold metal mixed with something sweet, but I figured it was just the wet clothes or the car. We drove in silence for a while. The heater hummed, and the tires crunched on the gravel shoulder when I adjusted speed. After about 10 minutes, I glanced at the rearview mirror, but she wasn't there. I turned my head. The back seat was empty. I froze, hand gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. The door was still locked. The light inside the car was dim, but I could see every corner clearly. No sign she'd gotten out. The seatbelt buckle hung idle. The wet jacket she'd thrown on the seat was gone. I blinked, checked again. Nothing, but the smell was still there. That metallic scent, like a faint electric charge mixed with cold iron, lingering in the air where she'd been. I pulled over to the side, heart pounding, looked back at the empty road, the dense trees on both sides, nothing but silence and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. I called out, "Lisa?" My voice cracked. No answer. I unlocked the doors, got out, and circled the car, shining my flashlight down the shoulder. Nothing. No footprints, no jacket, no sign she'd walked away. I got back in, locked the doors, and stared out into the black forest. The air felt thicker, heavier, like something was watching just beyond the tree line. I wanted to call the cops, but didn't know what to say. Picked up a hitchhiker who disappeared into thin air. They'd think I was nuts. I started the car again, hands still shaking. As I pulled back onto the highway, the metallic smell grew stronger for a moment, then faded as quickly as it had come. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her sitting there, but the back seat stayed empty. I pulled into my driveway at about 1:30 a.m. The house was dark and quiet. I shut off the engine and sat for a minute, trying to process what just happened. I kept smelling that strange, metallic scent in the car, even after I turned off the heater and opened the windows. It was faint, but definitely there. I grabbed a cloth and wiped down the back seat, but it wouldn't go away. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. The next morning I told my sister about it. She just looked at me like I'd lost it, said maybe I was overtired or the stress was getting to me. But I kept thinking about the way Lisa looked, how scared she seemed, like she wasn't just stranded, but running from something. And the smell. That smell. Days later, I found a small patch of wetness on the floor where her feet might have rested. I cleaned it up, but no matter what I did, the metallic scent never completely left the car. Sometimes at night, I swear I can still catch it, faint and cold, like a warning or a reminder. I don't know who Lisa was or where she went, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't just a hitchhiker. It was late September, and my buddy Carl and I had gone out to Goose Hollow Lake for some night fishing. That's up in northeastern Pennsylvania. Real quiet, not a lot of people. Carl's got a little aluminum boat with an electric trolling motor, and we'd taken it out to this cove on the north end of the lake. It's shallow there, lots of lily pads and deadfall, good for bass. The sun had gone down around 7:15, and by 8 it was fully dark. No wind, just dead calm. Water was glassy, sky was clear, stars out, and the whole lake was still. We were both sitting on the bench seats, not saying much, just tossing lines and sipping warm beer. I remember it was unusually warm that night. Still in the low 70s even after sunset. No bugs either, which was odd. Usually up there you'd be swatting mosquitoes non-stop, especially near the water. But it was just quiet. No bugs, no frogs, no fish jumping. I only noticed how quiet it was once Carl mentioned it. "You hear that?" he said. I looked over. "What?" He sort of gestured around. "Exactly." It was like everything had muted at once. Even our voices felt too loud. The water lapped against the side of the boat, but there was nothing else. No crickets, no distant trucks. Just that dead silence. We sat still for a while, both listening. I don't know how long we were like that, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, when we saw this light through the trees on the east side of the lake. It wasn't bright, kind of a dull amber color, almost like a street lamp, but it was moving slowly above the tree line, gliding left to right. No strobing, no blinking, just this steady, quiet glide. I thought it might be a drone at first. Plenty of people fly them around, but it didn't have that high-pitched hum. It didn't make any noise at all. And it wasn't zigzagging or adjusting, just one smooth path like it was on rails. Carl stood up real slow and put his hand on my shoulder. He was squinting toward it. "You seeing that?" he asked. I nodded. We watched it for maybe 15-20 seconds, just drifting across the treetops. Then it dipped behind the trees and disappeared. We both kept looking, expecting it to pop up again. Instead, it reappeared directly across the lake, on the west side now, maybe 2-3 seconds later. Same height, same amber glow, same silent glide. But there's no way something could have gotten across that fast. It would have had to cross about a mile of water and dense forest instantly. No sound, no flash. Just there, then not, then there again. Carl sat back down real slowly and just stared at it. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. We watched it for another minute or so. It moved slower this time, like it was scanning something. Then it stopped, just hung there, completely still above the trees. I remember thinking how unnatural that looked. No sway, no drift, just locked in place like it had frozen. Then it blinked out, not like it flew away, not like it dimmed. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. No trail, no noise, just gone. We sat in the boat for a long time after that, neither of us saying anything. Eventually, Carl reeled in his line and said we should head back. I agreed. The weird part was, when we turned on the headlamp, we realized our watches were off. Mine said 9:22, Carl's said 10:03. I checked my phone. It said 10:39. We'd only brought 3 beers each, and we weren't drunk. The trolling motor was still running fine, and we'd only planned to stay out until 10. But somehow 2 hours had passed, and neither of us remembered that much time going by. On the way back to the dock, I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see the light again. But the lake stayed dark. Still no bugs, still no sound. When we got to shore, everything looked normal. Truck was there, gear was dry, keys were in my pocket, but the truck clock was off too. It said 12:12, which didn't line up with anything. We didn't talk much driving home. Carl looked pale, and I think we were both trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. Just a weird light. Could have been a drone, could have been anything. But that silence, how dead the lake went right before it showed up, that's what stuck with me. That and the time. A few days later, Carl told me he tried to go back out there during the day and got turned around trying to find the cove. He said the GPS on his phone wouldn't settle, kept jumping around, and his compass app spun in slow circles no matter which way he pointed it. I haven't been back to that lake since. It started with the lights flickering, just once. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out a coffee mug when everything blinked off, came back on, and then went completely dark. It wasn't stormy, no wind, no reason for it. Just a calm, clear night. Early March, around 9:15 p.m. The temperature had dipped, but the sky was clean and dry. I live about 10 miles outside of Fairview, up in eastern Tennessee. The kind of place where houses are spread out and you lose cell signal if you walk too far from the porch. We're on well water, propane heat, no natural gas lines out here. The power cuts out sometimes, a blown transformer, or some raccoon chewing something it shouldn't. So at first I didn't think much of it. I stood there in the dark, waiting to see if it was just a quick blip or something longer. Then, exactly 12 seconds later, everything came back on. The fridge kicked in with that little clunk, the porch light outside glowed through the window, and the baseboard heater started humming again. I looked over at the microwave. It was blinking like always when the power goes out. 12. Same with the stove clock. My first thought was to check the breaker box, but everything looked fine. I reset the clocks without thinking much about it and went to let the dog out. A few minutes later, I passed the old wall clock in the hallway. This weird antique one my grandfather gave me with actual gears and a wind-up key. I hadn't touched it in months, but it was ticking. Not only that, it said 9:34. I looked at my phone again. 9:30. I figured I'd just forgotten to adjust it after the last time the power went out. It's always a little off. Never perfect. But then I walked into the bedroom and saw the battery-powered alarm clock on my nightstand. one of those basic analog ones with the little red hand, and it also said 9:34. The one in the den? Same. I've got 6 clocks in this house that aren't digital. Every single one of them was exactly 4 minutes fast. Not 3, not 5. 4 on the dot. I stood there in the hallway for a minute, watching the second hand on the old wall clock. It was moving steady. No skips, no lag, just normal ticking. But I couldn't figure out how they all ended up synced to the exact same wrong time. I went outside partly to get some air and partly just to shake the weird feeling. My dog Murphy was still out there, standing stiff near the edge of the yard, ears pointed toward the tree line. He wasn't barking, just watching. Just watching. I called him a couple times, but he didn't come right away, which was unusual. He finally jogged back, real slow, like he wasn't totally sure it was safe. I crouched down to pet him and noticed the air felt flat, still, even for out here. No night insects, no rustling in the woods, just absolute quiet. I went back inside and poured myself a little bourbon. Sat down in the den, turned on the TV just to have some noise. Local news was wrapping up. They didn't mention any outages. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard a low hum coming from the back of the house, almost like a generator, but muffled. I don't have a generator. My nearest neighbor is about a mile away, and even if they had one running, I wouldn't hear it from inside. I walked down the hall, and as I passed the guest bedroom, I heard it clearer. A pulsing sound, low and slow, like someone revving a truck far away and letting the engine wind down, then revving again. But it was too even, too mechanical, not natural. I opened the blinds. Nothing outside. The porch motion light didn't trigger. I flipped the switch and stepped onto the back steps. The sound stopped instantly. I stood there, waiting. It didn't start up again. The yard looked normal, same scraggly grass, same busted bird feeder swinging on the branch near the shed, but the woods felt wrong. It's hard to explain. Just off, like I was being watched. I went back in, locked the door behind me. I checked the clocks again, still 4 minutes fast. I tried to record a video on my phone, comparing the microwave clock to the analog one on the wall. But right as I started filming, my phone shut off. Full battery, no warning, just powered down. Wouldn't turn back on until I plugged it into the charger. That's when I noticed the living room light was pulsing. Not flickering, not dimming, pulsing. Like a slow heartbeat. Bright, dim in a rhythm. I turned it off at the switch. The hum started again. Same pulsing tone, in sync with the light. Like they were connected somehow. I just sat there for a while, on the edge of the couch, staring at the blank TV. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. I don't have a second floor. The sound came from directly above the den. 5 or 6 distinct steps, slow and heavy, like someone walking across a wood floor. I stood up, heart racing, and just listened. The ceiling was silent now, but the hum was still going. I turned off everything. Lights, TV, even the fridge. Unplugged it. I just stood there in the dark, listening. The hum stopped again. No more footsteps. No more pulsing. I stood in my yard till nearly 1 in the morning with a flashlight and didn't see or hear anything else. When I came back in, all the clocks still showed 4 minutes ahead of the time on my phone. The next morning, I drove into town. The power company didn't show any outages in the area. None of my neighbors, at least the ones I talked to, had lost power, and nobody else had any clocks that jumped. A week later, I took the wall clock down and removed the back cover. I thought maybe it was some kind of mechanical issue, a jam, a spring unwinding too fast, but the gears were fine. The mechanism was clean. It hadn't been wound in months. It shouldn't have been ticking at all. I let it run. It kept perfect time, 4 minutes ahead. Always. Sometimes I hear the hum again, just faint, far off, only at night. Murphy hears it too. He'll sit by the back door, staring out into the trees, not barking, just listening. The clocks never jumped again, but they've never gone back either. Always 4 minutes fast, always ticking. We were camping out near the Black Rock Desert, just a couple hours north of Reno. It was late August, hot during the day, but the kind of dry heat that doesn't stick to you. At night, it cooled off fast, and you'd want a hoodie by the fire. Me, my wife Heather, and our 2 kids, Ellie and Josh. We'd taken a week off and figured we'd try something more remote, away from the usual KOAs and crowded parks. We found a flat spot near the edge of a dry lake bed. Not quite on the playa, but close enough to walk out and watch the stars without light pollution. No cell service, no other campers for miles. Closest paved road was a good 40 minutes away. We set up camp in a little sandy dip with some sagebrush on the perimeter. Brought a 6-person dome tent, 2 folding tables, and a pop-up shade we anchored down with rocks. The kids had their own little sleeping bags, and we all crashed in the same tent. The first few nights were perfect. Big sky, quiet evenings, maybe the occasional coyote in the distance, but nothing close. We cooked on the camp stove, roasted marshmallows, played cards, the usual. It was the kind of trip where you stop checking your phone for the time and just move with the daylight. What I remember most about the third night was the wind. It had picked up just after dinner. Not strong enough to wreck the tent, but enough that the walls flexed a little, and we had to tighten the guy lines before bed. The sound of it rushing over the lake bed was strange, too. It wasn't loud exactly, just steady, like white noise, but lower pitched. Constant, almost like a hum. I figured it was the terrain. Big flat surfaces make weird acoustics. We zipped in for the night a little after 10. Heather and I laid in the middle, kids on either side. The lantern was off. Stars were visible through the mesh above. I remember looking at my watch before I drifted off. It said 10:17. That detail stuck with me for some reason. Next thing I knew, I was awake. Not startled awake, just suddenly not asleep. My eyes opened, and it felt like I hadn't been out for more than a minute or two. No grogginess, no stiffness, just up. Heather was still asleep, so were the kids. Everything inside the tent looked normal. The lantern was where I left it. No signs anyone had moved, but something felt off. I sat up and looked around. That's when I realized the tent zipper, the main door, was fully closed. Not just zipped shut, but the little pull tabs were tucked outside. From inside, you couldn't open it without reaching through the mesh sleeve and fishing the zipper handle in. And that's not how we'd left it. We always zipped it up from the inside before bed. My first thought was wind. Maybe it flipped the flaps or something. But the wind had completely stopped. No sound, no movement, just dead still. I reached for my watch, which I'd set next to my sleeping bag. It said 2:46 a.m. I frowned. That didn't feel right. I had that weird sense that it was earlier than that, like maybe 12:30 or 1. I picked up the lantern and turned it on, just a soft glow. Heather stirred and asked what was wrong. I said I wasn't sure, just that something felt weird. She sat up too and reached for her wristwatch from her bag pocket. Same thing, 2:46 a.m. exactly. Not 2:44, not 2:48, exactly. I remember looking at her and saying, "Is that what yours says?" We both leaned over and checked Ellie's and Josh's watches, which we'd set on the gear bag between them so we wouldn't step on them. Same time, 2:46. All 4, even though we'd bought them at different times, different brands. That's when I noticed something else. There were faint impressions in the dust near the tent entrance. Not footprints exactly, more like shallow scuffs, like someone had walked through in socks or soft shoes. They weren't ours. We'd all been barefoot in the tent, and they were too small for my feet, too big for Ellie's. Just off. I pulled the zipper in and opened the flap. Outside, the moon was low and orange. Visibility was decent. Enough to see the scrub brush around the camp, the tables, the fire pit. But there was something about the light that felt wrong, like it was too flat. Shadows weren't where they should be. I looked at our camp stove and couldn't see a shadow behind it. I moved my hand in front of the tent. Nothing, no shadow on the ground. That hit me in the gut. Heather came out after me, whispering to keep her voice down so the kids didn't wake. She saw it too. No shadows, even though the moon was out and bright. She said, "Do you hear that?" I listened. Nothing. Not wind, not bugs, not even our cooler creaking or the distant yip of coyotes like the previous nights. Just total silence. I looked out toward the lake bed, past the brush. There was a glow, faint. Not on the ground, but above it, maybe 20 feet up, a hazy light like the kind you'd see over a stadium, except there was no source, no beam, just the light itself. Pale and steady, maybe the size of a car hood, floating still above the playa. I didn't point at it. I didn't say anything. Heather grabbed my wrist. I think she saw it too. We stood there for a long time. I had this overwhelming sense that we weren't supposed to move. Not like we were frozen. We just knew not to. It was instinct. like the kind you get when a big animal is nearby in the dark and your body knows before your brain does. After maybe 5 minutes, though I can't be sure of the time, the glow dimmed. Not all at once, just slowly faded until it was gone. A second later, the wind came back, fast, like someone had unpaused it. It rushed across the tent, kicked dust against our legs. The brush moved again. We both flinched. That seemed to break the spell. We went back inside, zipped the tent up from the inside this time, and sat there in silence. I checked my watch again. Still 2:46. Eventually, I laid back down and stared up through the mesh. The stars looked normal again. In the morning, everything looked untouched. Camp was fine. No signs of animals. No tracks around the perimeter. But all 4 of our watches had stopped at the same time. Still said 2:46, even though the sun was already up. We tapped them, reset them, changed batteries. Nothing. They were just dead. Heather didn't want to talk about it. The kids never woke up during any of it, and we didn't tell them. We left that afternoon instead of staying another night. Packed up early and didn't say much on the drive back. I still have that watch in a drawer somewhere. It's never worked again. It started when a sheriff's deputy found me walking across a soybean field just outside of Carthage, Illinois, around 3 in the morning. I was barefoot and completely naked. No wallet, no phone, nothing. Just me and this weird buzzing in my head that wouldn't go away. I didn't remember how I got there. The last thing I could clearly recall was sitting on my couch watching a baseball game, Cubs versus Reds. That would have been Tuesday night. Then I blinked, and I was 30 miles from home, walking through a field in the dark with freezing dew soaking my legs. The deputy asked if I'd been drinking or using anything. I told him no. I was shivering, but I wasn't hurt, not visibly. He wrapped me in a blanket and called for an ambulance. I told them my name, Eli Callahan, and where I lived. They ran me through the system to check for priors or mental health alerts, and something flagged. They kept giving each other weird looks. The medic asked me if I had head trauma, if I'd fallen, if I remembered being in a car accident. I said no to all of it. I felt mostly okay, just weird, like I'd woken up too fast after sleeping way too long. At the hospital, they took blood, urine, and did a CT scan. Everything came back clean. No signs of stroke, no drugs in my system, no physical injuries besides some scratches on my shins. I kept asking what was going on. They didn't really answer me. Eventually, a detective showed up. Tall guy with a crew cut, maybe early 50s. He sat down in the corner of the ER room and watched me for a while before he said anything. Then he asked me for my social security number. I gave it to him. He asked if I'd ever changed my name. I told him no. Then he pulled a small fingerprint scanner from his bag, like one of those portable ones cops use, and took my prints. He didn't tell me the results, but his whole posture changed afterward. More rigid. He excused himself and stepped outside. 2 more officers showed up 10 minutes later and stood just outside the curtain. That's when I started getting nervous. Eventually, someone from the state came in, maybe a Fed, not sure, and they asked me to follow them to a secure office at the hospital. I wasn't under arrest, but they didn't want me leaving. They were polite, but firm. We sat down in this windowless room, and the man showed me a folder. Inside was a copy of my birth certificate, my driver's license photo, even high school yearbook pictures. All of it matched. The address was right. The parents were right. My birth date was right. Then he said, "Your DNA matches the file. We confirmed your identity, but your fingerprints don't." I thought he was joking. I laughed a little, but he didn't. He showed me a sheet with 2 sets of prints, one from my DMV file from when I renewed my license last year, and one from the scanner they just used on me, side by side. They didn't match. They looked close, similar loops and arches, but the minutiae were different. Ridge breaks, bifurcations, and deltas, stuff you can't really fake or change. Not easily. He said, "You are Eli Callahan, but these aren't your fingerprints." That's when I noticed my eyes in the mirror behind him. They were gray, not bluish gray or hazel, just pale gray, almost silver, like frost. I leaned closer to check, blinking hard. I've had brown eyes my whole life. My mom used to say I had the same eyes as her brother, warm and dark. I'd seen them in mirrors every day. Now they were gray. When they brought my mother in the next morning, she stared at me for a long time before she spoke. She didn't cry or hug me. She just looked confused. I said, "It's me, Mom." And she said, "It sounds like you, but your eyes," that was the first thing she said. "Your eyes were brown. Why are they gray now?" They did more scans, this time focused on my hands and eyes. They tested for chemical exposure, pigment disorders, anything they could think of. Nothing came back unusual, just not consistent with who I used to be. Over the next few days, they kept me for observation. The doctors talked in hushed voices. Everyone seemed polite but distant, like they were handling something fragile. I didn't feel different inside. My memories were intact. I remembered my childhood, my passwords, my landlord's name. I even recited the combination to the lock on my gym locker. But little things started bothering me. I couldn't remember the name of my 5th grade teacher, even though I'd told people stories about her before. I blanked on the lyrics to a song I knew by heart. My handwriting looked off. Same basic style, but messier, like I was faking my own signature. And there were scars I couldn't explain. One on the back of my shoulder blade, round and flat, about the size of a nickel. It looked old, like it had healed years ago. But I'd never had surgery there, never even had a mole removed. I started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but repeating images. A room that felt huge but had no corners, soft glowing light with no source. A sensation of floating, not flying but drifting like being underwater. The sound of clicking, rhythmic and layered like bones tapping glass. Sometimes I woke up and my nose was bleeding. Not heavy, just enough to stain the pillow. They finally let me go home after 5 days. I had to sign forms I didn't fully understand, mostly privacy waivers and something about non-standard biometric variants. My mom picked me up and drove me home. She didn't say much. When I stepped inside my apartment, everything looked the same. My mail was piled up. The dishes I'd left in the sink were still there, crusted and dry. But it didn't feel like mine. I walked from room to room like I was visiting someone else's place. I tried watching baseball again, thinking it might jog something back into place. But I couldn't follow it. Not the rules, I still remembered those, but the rhythm of the game. I kept getting distracted, zoning out during pitches, blinking and realizing I'd missed whole innings. At my job, people said I seemed off. One coworker, Shannon, said my voice sounded slightly higher, like I had a cold. Another said I'd gotten thinner, even though I weighed the same. And sometimes people didn't recognize me at all. I ran into a guy I'd gone to school with, Kyle Brewer, at the gas station. And when I said hi, he gave me this blank look and said, "Sorry, man, I don't think I know you." I reminded him who I was, told him about Mr. Ralston's physics class where we'd gotten detention together. He just shook his head and said, "Nope, I don't remember any of that." Even after I showed him a photo of the two of us from high school, he looked at it and said, "That's you?" He said, "Looks kind of like you, I guess." I don't know what happened to me. I don't know where I was during those missing hours or why the things that should fit don't anymore. But I wake up sometimes with that buzzing in my head again, and the dreams keep coming. Always that same sound, click, 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 and the feeling that I'm being pulled upward, weightless, into something too big to see. My mom doesn't call much anymore. She says I sound like her son, but she can't look me in the eyes when we talk. I think it's because of the color. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe she sees what I don't. Maybe she knows something left and something else came back. We were just a few miles east of Rachel, Nevada, off one of those endless gravel roads that lead toward the Nellis boundary signs. It was late September, warm during the day, but cold as hell once the sun dropped. I was out there with 3 friends, Mason, Jared, and Liz, all of us in our late 20s. Mason had this idea to camp near the border of the Area 51 restricted zone. Just a novelty trip. We weren't trying to trespass or get arrested, just wanted to camp, watch the sky, maybe catch some weird lights if we got lucky. We brought 2 tents, parked my Tacoma behind a low ridge to block the wind, and set up about half a mile from the no trespassing signs. Still on public land, still legal. We had a little fire ring going by sunset, and everyone was in good spirits. Liz had brought a cheap pair of night vision binoculars, and we were passing them around, spotting aircraft. You could tell the difference between commercial planes and the military stuff, the speed, the height. We even saw something banking hard around 10 p.m., like way too fast for how sharp it turned, but it was too far off to get a good look. Anyway, around midnight, the wind started to pick up and the others decided to crash. I stayed up, sitting in one of those collapsible camp chairs near the fire, just kind of zoned out. I don't sleep well on the ground anyway, and I liked being the last one up. It was dead quiet by then. I remember the fire had died down to embers, and all I could hear was the wind brushing over the rocks and the nylon walls of the tents rustling now and then. Then the red light swept across the ground. It didn't come from above like a helicopter. It wasn't a flashlight or a vehicle. There was no engine, no rotors, no hum. It was just there. This wide, flat beam of red light moving across the scrubby ground about 20 feet from where I sat. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It was perfectly even, about 4 feet wide, maybe 10 feet long, like a rectangle gliding sideways. At first, I thought someone was messing with a drone, maybe one of the other campers nearby, but there weren't any other cars for miles. We hadn't passed anyone all day. I stood up slowly and watched the beam slide farther out into the brush. It made no sound. Nothing cast it. I checked the sky, scanned the hills, turned a full circle. There was no source, just the beam. It stopped suddenly. It didn't fade out. It just froze in place for maybe 2 seconds, then snapped away. Not like it shut off, like it disappeared. I held my breath for a while. It was darker than it had been. The fire was almost completely out, and the moon had dipped behind the ridge. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it where the beam had been, but it looked the same. Sagebrush, dirt, a few tire tracks from earlier. I sat back down and kept the flashlight on my lap. I didn't want to wake the others unless something else happened. I tried convincing myself it had to be something explainable, maybe a reflection from a passing plane, even though the angle was wrong and it was dead quiet. I was wide awake now, just waiting. About 20 minutes later, I heard a series of clicks. Not mechanical, not metal. More like tongue clicks, but fast and rhythmic. 4 in a row, spaced evenly, then silence. I looked toward the sound, which came from the northwest slope, maybe 50 feet beyond the tents. I stood up again, flashlight off, and waited. Then another set, 4 clicks. Same pattern, same place. I said hello without really meaning to. Nothing answered. No wind, no animals, no footsteps. I walked a few steps toward the sound, then stopped. Something about it felt off, like I was being baited. I backed up slowly and got into the truck, locked the doors. I waited there for another hour, listening. No more clicks, no more lights. Eventually, I fell asleep in the cab. The sun was already up when I woke up, probably around 7 a.m. Mason was boiling water over the camp stove and didn't seem to notice anything weird. Neither did Jared or Liz. I asked if any of them had been up during the night. They all said no. When we packed up and headed out, I stopped the truck by the spot where the red beam had swept across the dirt. I walked out a bit to look, not sure what I was expecting. There was a faint, rectangular impression in the dust. Not burned, not wet, just slightly more compacted, like someone had pressed a plank into the ground and removed it. I didn't say anything to the others. We just drove out the way we came. When we passed the no drones sign near the cattle grid, I remember Mason joking about how dumb it would be to fly anything out here without getting it shot down. I kept thinking about the beam, the way it moved, the way it stopped. It didn't act like light. I was working the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town upstate New York. It was early November, and the night had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower itself wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top where I managed local emergency broadcasts and kept the signal running for a handful of small communities nearby. That night started like any other. I got to the tower around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. The fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. The silence was absolute, except for the soft hum of the equipment and the occasional beep or click from the transmitter. Around midnight, I was going through the usual checks when the radio started to crackle with static. At first, it was normal, just interference from the weather or a weak signal from a distant station. But then the static got louder, like someone was trying to push through with a signal of their own. It wasn't any kind of code or message I recognized, just this low, drawn-out hiss that didn't belong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear it, but the static stayed, filling the room with this eerie white noise. It was different from the usual interference, almost like it had intention behind it. I leaned closer to the microphone and stopped transmitting, thinking maybe I could hear it better without my voice cutting through. That's when I saw him. Outside the window, just past the fog, standing on the metal catwalk wrapping the tower, was a man, dressed in black from head to toe. Not the usual workman's gear or casual jacket you'd expect in this cold. No, this guy was wearing a suit, a black suit and a tie. His hair was slicked back, and his face was pale, almost too smooth in the dim light. He didn't move like a normal person, though. He stood still, almost statuesque, except for one thing. His hand was raised, palm facing me, this slow, clear gesture to stop what I was doing. I blinked, and for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The fog was thick, the room was dim, and the static was still there, filling every corner of the space. But when I looked again, he was still there, unmoving, silently watching. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't tell if they were dark or reflecting the faint glow from the control panel inside. My first instinct was to reach for the radio and start transmitting again, maybe call out to him, but the static rose up suddenly, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It sounded like interference, but it was almost like the radio itself was warning me, drowning out my words with this overwhelming hiss. I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket, my heart pounding. I watched him for a moment longer, and then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog. The mist swallowed him whole, and he was gone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the static, the silence, the faint hum of the tower's machinery. The radio never cleared up completely. When the morning shift showed up, I told them about the static and the figure outside, but no one really believed me. They said it was probably just fatigue or the fog playing tricks. But that night was only the start. Over the next few days, my phone started acting weird. Calls wouldn't go through, texts sent themselves blank, and sometimes my screen would flicker, showing flashes of static even when the phone was off. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me whenever I was outside or driving home in the dark. A few nights later, I was walking to my car in the parking lot behind the tower when I noticed a black sedan parked near the edge where the lot met the woods. It was the kind of car you don't see around here. Too clean, too polished, and out of place next to the pickup trucks and older sedans most folks drove. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw two men step out, both wearing dark suits similar to the man on the tower. They moved calmly, almost like they were on a mission, but not in a hurry. One of them looked directly at me as I approached and gave a small nod. I stopped, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said, voice low and serious. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could answer, they got back into the car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the cold, fog swirling around my feet. After that, the static got worse. My broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just when I was about to sign off, I thought I heard faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could make out clearly, but it was enough to make me pause. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, the way he moved, and the warning. I never saw him or the two men again, but their presence lingered. Every time I climbed up that tower, I felt like I was being watched, like the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and the broadcasts returned to normal, but the feeling didn't go away. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from somewhere just beyond the trees. I've been tracking wildlife in the Pacific Northwest for almost 10 years now, mostly deer, elk, and the usual forest critters. It's a job that requires a lot of patience, paying attention to subtle signs, broken twigs, hoof prints, scat, anything that tells you an animal passed through. I'm used to the quiet and the isolation. It's just me, the forest, and whatever's moving through it. A couple weeks ago, I was out on a routine walk, following a trail I'd been monitoring for deer activity. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that presses down on everything, making the forest feel heavier. It had rained the day before, so the ground was soft and muddy in places. About an hour into the hike, I came across something strange. A perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across, in the middle of a clearing. The grass and underbrush inside the circle were completely flattened, pressed down as if something heavy had sat there for a while. What made it odd was the edges. The border was sharp, like someone took a giant cookie cutter to the ground. The circle was completely clear of any leaves or branches sticking up. I knelt down and started looking for tracks. Usually an animal or group of animals would leave some kind of trail leading in or out, but this time there was nothing. No prints, no drag marks, no broken twigs. The mud around the circle looked untouched, like whatever had been there had somehow appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. I circled around a couple times, scanning the edges for any sign of disturbance beyond the circle. The trees and bushes outside were normal, some snapped branches here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary for a forest path. It didn't make any sense. Usually, if deer or elk bed down, they leave tracks, scrape the ground, or flatten a rough patch. But this was too precise, too clean, like someone or something had sat there but didn't walk in or out. I pulled out my phone to snap some photos. I wanted to show them to a couple friends who track animals too, see if maybe they'd seen anything like it. While I was kneeling, I heard a twig snap behind me. I looked up fast. About 30 feet into the trees, two men stepped out onto the trail. They were wearing black suits, the kind you'd expect from a business meeting, but they didn't have ties or anything casual. Their clothes looked stiff and they didn't seem to be dressed for hiking. Both had short, dark hair, clean-shaven, and serious expressions. I didn't say anything at first. They didn't either. They just walked slowly toward the circle. One of them bent down and started counting something along the edge, pointing silently at different spots on the ground. The other just stood there, watching. Neither looked at me. I didn't want to speak up, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. They counted around the circle a few times, always without talking. Then, without a word, they turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing between the trees. I stayed frozen for a few minutes, trying to figure out if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the circle was still there, and my phone was in my hand with the pictures I'd taken. When I got home, I tried to look up if anyone had reported anything similar in the area. Nothing. No local news, no hiking forums, no wildlife blogs, and anything like a perfect circle or strange men in black suits. That night, I kept thinking about the circle and the way those two men had just appeared and vanished. Like they were connected to it somehow, but I couldn't explain how. The next morning, I went back to the spot, hoping maybe I'd find more clues. The circle was still there, but something had changed. The ground inside looked drier, less pressed down, like the forest was slowly trying to erase whatever had been done. I stayed a while, watching for any animals, but the usual deer and squirrels kept their distance. I felt watched, like I wasn't alone, even though I didn't see anyone. Over the next few days, I noticed small things off around the woods near my house. Footsteps that stopped abruptly, a car parked a block away that I didn't recognize, shadows that flickered just at the edge of my vision. I kept telling myself it was my imagination or normal forest stuff, but I'm not sure anymore. Whatever that circle was, and whoever those men were, they left a mark I can't explain. And now, I feel like the forest isn't just home to animals anymore. I was camping alone out in the Mojave Desert one weekend in late October. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just me, my old Chevy truck, and a small tent I'd set up near a dried-up wash about 20 miles from the nearest town. I'd wanted to get away from everything for a couple of days. No phone, no internet, just the desert and the stars. The first night was pretty normal. After setting up camp, I cooked some beans over the fire and watched the sky turn dark. The air was dry and cool, just cold enough to make the fire feel good. No wind, nothing but the quiet hum of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Around midnight, I was lying back on my sleeping bag just staring up, trying to take in as many stars as I could. The Milky Way was spread out like a big cloudy streak, and there were a few bright shooting stars streaking across here and there. Pretty typical for a desert night. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something weird. It looked like a shooting star at first, bright white, moving fast, a perfect streak across the sky. But halfway through its path, it just stopped, like someone hit the pause button. Then it started moving backwards, slowly, along the same path it had just come. I sat up, blinking, because that made no sense. Shooting stars don't move backward, right? I rubbed my eyes and looked again. It was definitely moving backward, gliding smoothly and silently. No sound at all. Then it paused again near where I'd first seen it, just hanging there for maybe 5 or 6 seconds. It wasn't bright anymore, more like a dull whoa. Then, suddenly, blink glow. It's like inked out, like it vanished. Just gone. No trail, no sparkle, nothing. I sat there for a long time, just staring at that spot. My heart was racing, but I couldn't figure out what I'd just seen. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or that it was some kind of weird atmospheric thing. I tried to shake it off and went back to lying down, but the feeling stuck with me. The kind of feeling you get when something's just a little off, but you can't explain how. I looked around the campfire, which was now just a pile of cold ashes, and noticed something else. My compass, which I'd left on the picnic table, was spinning slowly. Not fast, but steady, like it was caught in some invisible current. I picked it up, thinking maybe it was broken, but the needle didn't settle on anything. It just spun around and around. I shook it, flipped it over, even took out the battery. There's no battery, it's a magnetic compass after all, but it kept spinning. I put it down, trying not to freak out. I told myself it was probably some weird magnetic anomaly, maybe from a mineral deposit in the ground or something. The next morning, I packed up and drove back to town, but the compass still spun the whole way. It didn't stop until I got into my apartment and set it down on my metal desk. Then it finally settled north like normal. I didn't want to think too much about it, but the whole trip felt strange after that. Like the desert had this invisible boundary where normal rules didn't apply. And that shooting star, it wasn't just a shooting star. It did things no meteor could do, with no sound and no trail. I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't something from this world. I was flying a small private plane near Groom Lake, Nevada, on a late afternoon flight back in early April. The sky was clear with just a few wisps of cirrus clouds, and the air was crisp but calm. I do a fair amount of flying for work and pleasure, mostly around Nevada and California, but this trip was just a quick round to drop off some paperwork in Las Vegas and then head home to Reno. I was cruising at about 7,500 feet, doing a straight line southwest from Groom Lake toward Las Vegas. Nothing special about the flight so far. I'd done it dozens of times. I was in a Cessna 182. Just me in the cockpit, running autopilot and keeping an eye on the instruments. The radio was mostly quiet, except for a few routine check-ins with flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something odd caught my eye on the right wingtip. At first, I thought it was a reflection. The sun was hitting the wing at a sharp angle and maybe the glare was playing tricks. But the thing didn't look like a typical glare or lens flare. It was this perfectly smooth, mirror-like shape, hovering about 100 feet off my right wing. I adjusted my sunglasses and leaned forward. It was about the size of a small car, maybe smaller. No visible edges or seams, just this featureless reflective surface that perfectly mirrored the sky and the wing beneath it. The reflection was so precise, it was almost like looking into a polished sheet of metal, except it wasn't part of the plane. I checked my instruments, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Altimeter steady, airspeed normal. The plane was stable, no sudden turbulence. My heart rate picked up a bit, not from fear, just surprise. I've flown a lot, and I've never seen anything like this. I reached for the radio to see if anyone else reported something in the area. Nothing. No chatter, no reports of other traffic. I tried the transponder, code 1200, the usual visual flight code. The radar was quiet, no blips anywhere near me. I pulled back the throttle a bit, watching the object as it kept pace exactly with my wingtip. It didn't move around or flicker. It stayed perfectly positioned, matching my speed and heading, almost like it was locked in. I turned the plane slightly to the left, testing if it would break formation. It didn't. The object mirrored my moves, holding its position relative to the wingtip with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone and tried to film it through the small side window, but the reflection on the glass and the speed of the plane made the image useless. Just a blur of sky and wing. I put the phone down after a few seconds, realizing this wasn't something I could capture well. For what felt like several minutes, maybe 5 or 6, the thing stayed there. Completely silent, no engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape floating beside me. The sky behind it reflected perfectly, but I could never catch a glimpse of anything inside or behind it. I tried calling flight control again. Control, this is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? No response. Then I checked the onboard radar scope. It was blank. No targets within a 20-mile radius. I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it a drone? But it was too big and too smooth, and I didn't hear any engines or see any propellers. Could it be a weather balloon? No. Weather balloons don't hover like that or keep pace exactly. Could it be a refraction of light or some atmospheric effect? I'm no scientist, but the sky was clear, and the thing was so well defined. After about 7 minutes, the object started to slowly pull away, moving backward relative to my wingtip. It shimmered briefly, then disappeared into the distance as if it vanished. I felt the need to verify everything again, but my instruments and plane felt fine. No warning lights, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I immediately checked the FAA traffic logs for that time. No unknown aircraft or unidentified radar blips. The tower controller told me nothing unusual had been reported. I told the people I flew with about it, but most just laughed it off. Must have been some weird glare or your mind playing tricks. But I kept thinking about how clear and solid it looked, and how the compasses and instruments didn't glitch at all. Driving home that night, I noticed a subtle hum in the car's stereo system. Not coming from the speakers, but something faint beneath. I turned everything off, and it stopped. In the following days, I kept checking my flight log and the instrument sensors on my plane. No errors. But sometimes, late at night, when I look at the wingtip, I swear I can feel that strange presence again. Like something's watching, just out of sight. It's the only time I've ever seen something that clearly didn't belong in the sky, and yet left no trace anywhere but my own eyes. I was 16, living in a small town out in Central Oregon, where the sky at night is so dark it almost hurts your eyes. My dad got me a decent camera for my birthday, and I got into long exposure photography. I wanted to capture stars, the Milky Way, whatever was up there. It felt like the best way to chase something quiet and big, something I couldn't touch but could still see. One Friday night in early September, I set up my tripod in the backyard. It was cool, maybe low 40s, but dry. The moon was just a sliver, barely bright enough to wash out any stars. I knew it was a good night for shooting. I had a few batteries, extra SD cards, and my hoodie zipped up tight because the wind picked up now and then. I aimed the camera toward the north, where the sky was clearest. I'd done long exposure shots before, usually 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, to get the star trails. This time I was trying a new setting, 3 minutes per shot. I was trying to capture more detail, longer trails, and maybe catch some of that faint light pollution from the town in the distance. I set the timer and sat back on the grass, looking up. The stars were so bright and sharp, it felt like I could reach out and grab one. I was thinking about how small we all are, just blinking dots on a blue ball spinning in space. I was feeling peaceful. After the first shot finished, I checked the image on the camera's screen. The star trails were perfect, a smooth arc, and everything looked normal. I clicked for a second shot. The camera counted down and snapped again, then a third. I took 5 shots in total. After the last one, I packed the camera back into my backpack and went inside to look at them on my laptop. At first glance, the photos looked exactly like I expected. Stars moving in smooth curves across black. Then, I noticed the fourth shot was weird. In the middle of the frame, cutting through the star trails, was a bright, straight beam of light. It looked like someone had shined a giant flashlight straight down from the sky. The beam was sharp-edged, pure white, and stretched all the way from the top of the frame to the bottom. I blinked a few times, zoomed in, zoomed out. The beam wasn't in the first, second, third, or fifth shots, just that one fourth photo. The other frames were taken with the same settings, from the same spot, just a few minutes apart. I went back outside and looked up. The sky was clear again, the stars just as bright as before. No weird light beams. I checked around for anything that might have caused it. A flashlight, a spotlight, a drone with a searchlight, but nothing. The house was quiet, my parents asleep inside. The next morning, I asked my best friend, Mara, if she wanted to see the photos. She's the kind of person who believes in weird stuff, so I thought she might have some explanation. When I showed her the beam, she said maybe it was a meteor or some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, but meteors don't usually show up as perfect straight beams in long exposures. They streak, sure, but not like a solid pillar. Later that day, I searched online for anything similar. I found a few people talking about unexplained lights caught on cameras, but nothing that quite matched what I saw. A lot of the pictures were blurry or grainy, or the light looked like a flash or flare. Mine was crisp, like it was really there, but only for that exact exposure. That night, I went back outside with the camera. I set it up in the same spot, same settings, hoping maybe I'd catch it again. I took 10 photos in a row. Nothing. Just normal star trails. I started feeling weird about the whole thing. Like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. But it wasn't scary exactly, just strange and out of place. About a week later, I was at school and told my science teacher, Mr. Carlson, about it. He's into astrophysics and photography, so I figured he might have a clue. He looked at the photo on my phone and frowned. "That's odd," he said. "That kind of beam doesn't line up with any known celestial events. No satellites or planes flying like that either." He said maybe it was a glitch in the sensor or a reflection inside the lens. But if it was a lens flare or sensor defect, why didn't it show up in any other frame? And why was it so perfectly vertical? It didn't make sense. I kept thinking about the photo all the time, especially when I was outside alone at night. I felt like something was watching or waiting. One night, about 2 weeks after I took the original photos, I was out in the backyard again. I didn't bring the camera this time, just sat on the grass, staring up. The wind was almost still, the sky darker than ever. Suddenly, I saw a faint glow in the northern sky, the same area I'd aimed the camera. It was subtle, a light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. It wasn't moving, not like a plane or satellite, just hovering. I squinted and focused, but it vanished within seconds. I wasn't sure if I really saw it or if my eyes were playing tricks. The next day, I looked through the rest of my photos from that first night. There was nothing else unusual besides that one beam. No other lights, no shadows, no shapes. But the strangest thing was that the timestamp on the photo with the beam was off by exactly 5 minutes. The camera clock was correct on every other file, but on that one shot, the time was 5 minutes later than it should have been. I double-checked the settings and metadata. No sign of manipulation or error. I asked my dad if he'd ever noticed the clock on the camera acting weird. He said no. It was like time shifted just for that one exposure. After that, I stopped trying to photograph the night sky. I didn't want to chase something I couldn't understand or control. Sometimes when I'm outside and the sky is clear, I still look up at that same patch of stars. I wonder if the beam was some kind of signal or just a freak accident of light and time. I never saw anything like it again. No beams, no hovering lights, just a single photo out of hundreds showing something I still can't explain. It started during that big thunderstorm we had last September, the one that rolled through central Missouri and knocked out power for half the county. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and I was up because the wind had woken me. Not unusual. I've got a couple big oaks in the backyard, and when they move, they move. The rain was coming down hard. I could hear it slamming against the kitchen windows and rattling the vent above the stove. The wind had that low, constant roar behind it, not gusts, just this steady wall of air, like the whole world was blowing sideways. Every few seconds, lightning would light up the yard, almost like daylight, and then everything would go black again. I remember standing at the sliding glass door with a mug of coffee, just watching the trees and trying to time the thunder. I wasn't scared, just waiting for the power to go out. It usually does when we get anything that's strong. That's when I saw it. There was a patch in the yard, maybe 20 feet across near the back fence, where the rain wasn't hitting. Not just a little less rain, none. It looked like someone had cut a perfect circle out of the storm. Everything else was soaked. You could see the water rippling across the lawn, blowing sideways in the wind. But this spot, dead center in the yard, was bone dry. No rain, no wind. Just stillness. I stepped outside under the overhang to get a better look. The moment I opened the door, I noticed something else. The noise dropped. It was still raining hard everywhere else, but the sound didn't feel right, like it was muffled somehow. Even the thunder sounded distant, like hearing it through thick glass. I didn't step off the patio, but I watched that circle for at least 5 minutes. The rain just slid off it, bending around the edge like there was some kind of invisible dome. It wasn't steam or mist or anything, it was just dry. The lightning kept flashing, and in those bright moments, I could see the grass inside the circle was pushed flat. But not randomly. It had a spiral to it, like someone had dragged a rake around the center a few times. I didn't go out there. Not that night. I checked the camera the next morning. I've got a motion-activated security cam pointed right at the yard, mostly to keep an eye on raccoons. The footage from the storm cut out at 1:31 a.m. Right when I saw the circle, and didn't start again until 3:28 a.m., that whole stretch was just static. Not black screen, not no signal. Static, like old TV snow. The rest of the footage before and after looked fine. Clear image, good audio, just that 1 2-hour block, completely useless. I walked out into the yard around 7 when the rain had stopped. Everything was soaked except that spot. It was still dry. The spiral was clearer in the daylight. Maybe 6 or 7 rings, flattened perfectly, all curling clockwise toward the center. The grass looked pressed down, not broken or torn. It had that damp, matted texture, like someone had been sitting there for a long time. I tried to brush it upright with my hand, but it stayed down. The air in that spot felt different too, colder. Not a lot, just a few degrees maybe, but it was enough to notice. I stood inside the edge for a few seconds, and my arms got goosebumps, even though it was already warming up for the day. I didn't stay there long. I checked the camera again after work, thinking maybe it had just glitched or lost power, but the weird part was, everything else around that time frame recorded fine. I've got a second cam near the driveway. That one picked up the storm, me walking around the kitchen, even the porch light flickering during the worst of it. But the backyard cam didn't log anything except static. No motion alerts, no system errors. Later that week, I had a guy from work come by. Kenny, he used to install those types of systems. I didn't tell him what happened, just asked him to check if the camera had shorted out or something. He looked it over, checked the footage and said there was no power loss, no corruption in the file. He couldn't explain the static. Said it looked like interference, but there was no obvious source. That spiral lasted 4 more days. Every morning I'd go out and it'd still be there, perfectly shaped, totally dry. It even stayed dry through a second rainstorm that hit the following Tuesday. Rained hard again, same as before, and once more the rest of the yard turned to mush, but that circle stayed untouched. On the 5th morning, it was gone. Not the flattened grass, that was still there, but the dryness, the coldness, that weird, still air. Everything felt normal again. The grass started springing back up that afternoon. A week later, you could barely see where it had been, just a faint ring of yellowed blades where it had stayed pressed the longest. I still check the cameras every now and then. Nothing like that's happened again. But sometimes if I'm standing at the window at night and the wind's blowing just right, I swear the grass shifts a little in that spot, like it remembers. I was halfway through my shift at Dry Mesa Radio Observatory when the static started. It was just after 10 p.m., a windless September night with a sky so clear you could see Milky Way stretching over the southern dish. I'd set up my folding chair next to the control shack, coffee in hand, scanning the telemetry readouts for any stray transmissions. The dishes tracked cosmic noise, sunspots, that sort of thing, mostly background hiss. But at 10:17, the left-hand monitor trailed off into a sputter of white noise, then went dead silent for a beat before snapping back on with the faintest pulse, like someone tapping a mic 20 feet away. I frowned, tapped the screen. No error messages. The other 3 dishes were normal. I keyed the handheld radio. Control to dish 4. Anything on your end? No answer. The silence was comfortable out here, usually. But that night, it felt too deep. I stood and crouched behind the shack, peered around the corner. The array of dishes sprawled across the plateau, polished steel in moonlight, each one pointing at a different slice of sky. Nothing was moving. No trucks, no lights, no wind. I forced a laugh and returned to my chair, logged the glitch in the shift log, and sat back down. At 11:03 p.m., I heard something over the radio. That same soft tapping, but now it was synced across all channels. I ran to the dish controls and muted them. The tapestries of static fell silent, leaving only the hum of the generator. Then I saw it, a pale amber light, like a slow-burning ember, moving just above the western horizon. It didn't zip like a plane, didn't flicker or blink. It drifted, maybe 20 degrees above the mesas, heading south. I grabbed binoculars from the rack. The light was too small to judge shape, but it had a gentle glow, not a headlight beam. No strobes, no contrail. Just a single orb of light moving at what looked like walking pace, except it would have been 1,000 feet up. I switched the binoculars for my telephoto lens and mounted it on the tripod. Framed the horizon between 2 dishes. The light held steady, then dipped below the rim of the mesa. I tracked the spot where it vanished and heard the generator hiccup, a cough of fuel. When it came back, the light was gone. I double-checked the logging software. The power draw had dipped for 6 seconds. The readouts on the dish motors flickered, then stabilized. Nothing indicated any external interference. No spikes in the grid, no radar returns on the base scanners. I pulled on a jacket and walked to the fence, staring down the slope into the scrub. The horizon was empty. Only the usual scrub pines and the ranch road cutting through. I spent the next hour pacing between dishes, listening for rotor wash or engine hum. My phone had no signal out here, no cell, no internet, so I couldn't even look up aircraft notices. I radioed the on-duty astronomer on the hilltop station, but got static back. Finally, I climbed back in the shack, scribbled anomaly at 11:03 in the log, and went back to watching for cosmic rays. Morning came gray and cool. The maintenance crew arrived right on schedule, truck engines rolling up the hill by 6:30. I grabbed my clipboard and went out to meet them, wondering if anyone else had spotted the light. At the gate, 2 men in black suits were standing by the guardhouse. No badges, no hats, shirts crisp and starched. Neither so much as looked at me. I swiped my ID badge and swiped it again. Still valid. I raised my hand and said, "Morning, Dan Clyde." They turned simultaneously. The taller one said, "Marcus Hall?" He didn't smile. I nodded. "That's me. You 2 knew?" He checked his phone, didn't look down, and handed me a manila folder. "Review this." The other man stood back, hands clasped. His tie was perfectly straight, shoes unscuffed. They spoke in low tones, too low for me to catch, but I caught fragments. Shift log, omit, discuss offline. I opened the folder. Inside was a printout of my entry, 11:3 anomaly, with a box checked classified. Below that, typed in a block font, "Do not discuss incident with anyone. Authority level, black site access required." I looked up. The shorter man said, "That was last night's anomaly. You saw nothing." He paused. "Do you understand?" I swallowed. "But I saw the light. It moved." I pointed west. It passed behind the mesa. The taller man took a step forward, expression polite but cold. "No such movement registered on our sensor arrays. No power fluctuation, no radio interference. You reported a spurious signal. That's all." I frowned. "Then why?" My words caught in my throat. The folder snapped shut in his hand. He said, "You're cleared for standard duty, but you will not log or speak of the incident again." His voice was neutral, final. He handed the folder back, turned on his heel, and the other man followed him through the gate. They didn't get in a car. They just walked down the hill, footsteps crunching in unison until the scrub pines swallowed them. I stood there, the gate's metal latch swinging in the morning breeze, that folder heavy in my hand. I went back to the control shack and tore out the log page with the anomaly entry. I tossed it in the burn barrel behind the generator shed, watched the wind curl the smoke toward the dishes. My stomach ached. The sky overhead was pale blue, a falcon wheeling above the array, eyes sharp for field mice. At lunch, I scanned the shift logs, no entry for 11:03. No note of power dip, no mention of radio glitch. It was like I'd never written it. My hands shook as I sipped coffee from the break room pot. I stared at the window, waiting for that amber light to drift back into view. That afternoon, the dish motors hummed through calibrations. The astronomer called in for clear data. I punched the keys, the sensors all checked out, no anomalies. I watched the sunset through the east window, hued orange and red behind the antennae. On my way home, I stopped at the junction above the mesa. The mesa's rim cut a clean line against the sky. I sat in the car for a long time, headlights off, radio silent, no lights dipped over the horizon, no humming, nothing but the scent of pinon and juniper. When I drove down the gravel road toward my trailer, I felt eyes on me from the ridge. I glanced up. Empty. I kept going until the lights of town appeared, small dots on the darkness. At home, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote, September 12th, 11:03 p.m., observed slow-moving amber light dip below mesa. Power generator hiccup. Sensor panel reset. Radio silence. No radar returns. Folder labeled classified, instructed to omit. I read it twice, closed the book, and locked it in my drawer. Outside, the night settled without a sound. I lay in bed, listening to the trailer's metal roof creak under a high wind. When I closed my eyes, I saw that light again, steady glow, descending over bare rock, disappearing like someone had lowered a lamp behind a curtain, and two men in black suits, faces unreadable, telling me what I could and couldn't see. I rolled up to the corner of 5th and Madison just after midnight, idling under the streetlight. Rain from earlier had slicked the pavement and steam curled off manhole covers. My name's Derek Chavez. I drive a cab for Eastside Taxis, and I was wrapping up what I thought would be my last shift before the weekend. A black sedan pulled in behind me, door opened, and two men in dark suits climbed into the back seat without a word. They shut the door so quietly I hardly heard the click. I glanced in the rear view. Both wore white shirts, skinny black ties, polished shoes, and sunglasses, even in the wet dark. One was tall and lean, the other shorter and square-shouldered. Neither gave me a destination. I tapped the meter and said, "Where to, gentlemen?" The tall one leaned forward, voice calm, no accent I could place. "No destination," he said. "Just drive." I nodded, leaned back. "Anything come up on the meter?" "Drive," was all he said. I pulled away and took Madison north toward the freeway. After a minute, I glanced at the fare display, $4.20 and climbing. I checked the rear view. No expression, no phone, just two dark shapes in black suits. I asked, "Roundabout on Maple?" The short one turned his head slightly and said, "Circle the city, follow directions." Directions? He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small slip of paper, and handed it to me blind. No writing facing me, just tiny water spots from the cab's humidity. I folded it into the console. I tried to read it, but couldn't make out letters in the low light. "Okay," I said. "Maple roundabout, then what?" He didn't answer. The tall one cleared his throat, tapped the back of my seat. His jacket shifted, revealing a silver clip, no gun handle, just a metal rectangle. "Begin." I took the first exit off the freeway onto Maple, looped the circle, then followed the on-ramp back. Lights of downtown shimmered ahead. I glanced at the slip. 3 simple arrows, left, right, left, and no street names. I followed them, drifting past quiet neighborhoods, neon signs, shuttered storefronts. The meter climbed past $50, then $70. My head throbbed. I checked my watch, 2:15 a.m., but I'd thought it was only 12:30. "Rough ride?" I said. Neither man reacted. The short one said, "Keep driving." I pressed the radio. Static. I tried the city channel. Nothing but hiss. Cell service was spotty, so I dropped the window a crack and listened for engines or sirens. Just distant hum, occasional car. I felt like I was the only person awake. At 3:07, I pulled onto a one-way street and followed the arrows back over the river up into the industrial district. Street lamps flickered orange. The slip had another arrow pointing back downtown. I swallowed and punched the gas. The city skyline drifted past neon signs reflecting on wet asphalt. By 4 a.m., I was somewhere near the old freight yard, rails rusty, warehouses dark. I looped a block lined with chain link fences. The meter read $142.50. My hands trembled on the wheel. I wanted to ask who was paying for this, but the air in the cab felt heavy, like a weight on my chest. At 4:22, I rounded a corner and saw a lone street lamp illuminating a crumpled slip of paper taped to a stop sign. I slowed. The shorter man leaned forward, pointed without moving his fingers. I braked. Under the lamp, the paper read, "Exit here." I followed an alley under a broken chain, past a shuttered auto shop, and came out on the bridge. I stopped when the arrow pointed straight ahead. The tall one reached out and opened the door himself, stepping onto the slick sidewalk without glancing back. The short one followed. I watched them walk into a bus shelter painted bright yellow, then merge into the night. I sat for 30 seconds, heart pounding. Then I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it gently. I picked up the paper slip from the console. It was blank, no ink, no letters. I checked the fare. It flashed fare courtesy of Agent S. Then the display reset to 0. My head spun. I closed the meter, locked the doors, and sat in the cab sipping lukewarm coffee. I checked my phone, 2 missed calls from dispatch, 1 voicemail. "Where are you, Chavez? Been driving in circles for hours. Report in." I bit my lip and hit call back. The line connected to an unknown number. No ring, just a click. Then a voice, low and calm, female, "Never mentioned last night's ride." I stuttered. "Who is this?" No answer, just silence. Then the line went dead. I sat in the empty cab for a long time, rain starting again, drumming on the roof. I finally got out, locked the doors, and walked under the bridge to the bus stop. My headlamp from the glove box flickered to life in my hand. The yellow shelter was empty. I saw no suits, no footprints in the puddles. I walked home through dark back streets and got inside my apartment at 5:03 a.m. I left the meter card in my pocket. It showed 0 charge. My phone no longer had the unknown number in the call log. I put on the kettle, stared at the rain-smeared window until dawn. When I left 2 hours later for my day job, I locked my front door and made sure nobody followed. I didn't mention it to dispatch. I don't know who paid for the ride or why they put me through all those loops. The slip of paper in my pocket is still blank, but I carry it anyway. Sometimes when the light hits it just right, I swear I see faint outlines of arrows. I usually tuck it back into my wallet and keep walking, hoping I never get that call again. My name's Eli Turner. I'm a field researcher, mostly studying permafrost and lake ice in the interior of Alaska. That last trip back in early March was one of those where the place starts feeling less like home and more like some kind of halfway point between here and nowhere. We set up camp on this frozen lake just outside the Alaska Range, near the little town of Cantwell. It's a spot my team's been eyeing for a while. Thick ice, steady cold, and some promising ground samples below. The kind of place you don't go if you're looking for company, which suited me fine. The first few days went smooth enough. We drilled cores, took measurements, and mapped the ice thickness. The lake's surface was vast and mirror flat, dusted with fresh snow that never stuck long because of the wind. We pitched our tents in a rough circle near the southern shore, close enough to the trees to cut some firewood, but far enough away to keep the camp quiet and safe. On the second night, I noticed something odd with my compass. I was double-checking bearings, trying to confirm our position relative to the ridge east of us. I pointed the compass toward the ridge like usual, but the needle spun wildly. Not a slow drift, but a frantic, twitchy dance. I figured it was a glitch or some interference, so I swapped it for another one. Same thing. The guys in the other tents heard me muttering, came out to check, and sure enough, their compasses were spinning too. We looked at each other like, what the hell? The ridge was just some granite outcropping. Nothing metal, no radio towers or anything that should be messing with magnets. We tried different spots around camp, and the spin only happened when pointing at the ridge. Point anywhere else, and the needles behaved normally. That alone was strange enough. But that night, when we came back from dinner, one of the crew called me out. Eli, look at this. We stepped into the moonlight, which was pale but steady thanks to the clear sky and snow reflection. Around our tents were footprints, large, bare impressions pressed into the snow. No boot treads, no snowshoes, nothing like anything we'd left. The prints were spaced evenly, forming a perfect circle roughly 30 feet wide around the camp. What threw us was that the prints didn't lead anywhere. They just looped around, crossing paths but never continuing beyond the circle. No breaks, no signs of exit or approach, like something had walked in circles all night, keeping its distance but watching. I checked the prints closer. They looked wrong, too symmetrical, too neat for any animal I knew. They weren't the right shape for a moose or wolf, and the spacing was too consistent for anything natural. The snow between and beyond the circle was untouched. The others joked at first. Frozen lake ghost footprints, or some prank from the snowshoe rats in town. But no one laughed too hard. The mood shifted. Everyone was a little on edge. I spent the rest of that night near the edge of camp, watching the ridge where the compass went haywire. The wind hummed through the trees, and the snow made everything sharp and quiet. The stars above looked familiar but distant, like they'd been rearranged just enough to make me pause. I swear I saw movement at the tree line. Something slipping between the trunks, maybe 2 or 3 shapes, but the shadows were too fast and too still all at once, like they weren't quite part of the forest. The next day we tried to ignore it, but the strange compass behavior continued. Every time I pointed it east toward the ridge, the needle spun like it had a mind of its own. That afternoon, while hiking to check sample sites closer to the ridge, I caught that movement again. Not animals. This was too deliberate. The shapes seemed to stay just at the edge of visibility, disappearing whenever I slowed down or tried to focus. That night, back at camp, the footprints were there again, still perfectly circular, fresh as before, but no new prints beyond the ring. I asked around about local stories when we radioed Cantwell for supplies. Old-timers talked about odd things seen on the ridge, strange lights, weird sounds on windless nights, and people who got lost only to show up hours later with no memory of where they'd been. I didn't pay much mind to the tales, but the feeling stayed with me. Something was out there watching us, maybe even moving closer, but always careful to stay just out of reach. By the 4th day, the compasses began spinning when pointed at the ridge, even from our snowmobiles and handheld units. Other electronics started acting up too. Radios crackled with static, GPS units would freeze or glitch. The ridge seemed to be messing with all of it, like a magnetic storm trapped in stone. One evening, while we sat around the small propane heater inside the main tent, the lights flickered. For a second, everything went dark except for the glow outside. I looked out and saw the ridge bathed in a pale, shifting light. It wasn't the moon or northern lights. It was soft, almost liquid in quality, pulsing slowly like a breath. No one else saw it. They were busy fixing gear and didn't notice my stare. I wanted to call it a trick of the eyes, but it felt real, alive somehow. The hairs on my neck stood up. I went outside for a closer look, leaving the others behind. The snow was still and deep, the air colder than before. The light on the ridge faded as I watched, but then I noticed something new. Small glimmers between the trees, like reflections off something smooth and wet, moving just beyond where I could see clearly. I thought I caught a glimpse of shapes, tall, thin, but not like any animal I knew. They didn't move like creatures with legs, but more like shadows sliding along the ground. I turned to head back, but for a moment I couldn't find my footprints in the snow. The path I just walked looked untouched, as if I'd appeared there without crossing the snow at all. The feeling of being watched deepened. I hurried back to camp, checking behind me every few steps, but no sounds or shapes followed. That night, the footprints circled the camp again. This time, they were joined by faint, shallow grooves cutting across the snow inside the ring. Almost like something dragged itself quietly from point to point, but the marks were too light to be anything solid. I didn't sleep much. The weight of those prints pressed on me like a question with no answer. By the 5th day, the compasses and electronics were useless. We packed up and headed back to Cantwell, leaving the lake and the ridge behind. Driving away, I kept glancing at the horizon. half expecting to see those flickering shapes watching us go. Back in town, the weirdness didn't follow. The compasses spun straight again, and the snow showed no sign of any strange tracks, but the memory of that place stayed. Sometimes, when the wind is still and the sky is clear, I find myself looking east toward that ridge, wondering what exactly was out there in the silence. Whatever it was, it didn't come close enough to speak or show itself clearly. It just circled us, silent and patient, leaving its marks in the snow and messing with our instruments. I don't have answers, just the sense that some part of Alaska's wild still holds secrets not meant for easy understanding. I guess that's part of why we keep going back, chasing what's out there, even if it never quite lets us find it.